Chapter 751. In the desert, a team of 200 people was walking slowly on the sand, as if they were taking a leisurely stroll. However, the atmosphere in the team was not the same. A short and stout man looked anxious. From time to time, he would glance at the back of the giant golden beast, waiting for the person above to speak. The sound of footsteps around him seemed to be filtered out. His ears were only waiting for the person behind the curtain to speak. Unfortunately, the silence had been going on for a while. The short and stout man could only wait anxiously. He wiped the sweat off his forehead, took out a water bag made of sea fish skin, and gulped down 2 mouthfuls of water. The water in the water bag was already very hot from the scorching sun. He felt as if his organs were being roasted the moment he gulped it down. It was mostly a psychological factor that caused him to feel this way. With his strength, the water temperature was nothing, but now was the time to be anxious. Even the slightest bit of heat could make him anxious. This man was called Tusu. He was once a slave master of low status in Whitestone City. He had trained a few desert insects, which he learned from some tribesmen. Back then, the people of the Wanchur tribe had similar techniques. He then combined the techniques of other tribes and created a unique technique to control insects that was suitable for himself. He could use the insects to understand what was happening in places where his eyes could not see. Previously, Tu Su knew that Su Li's team had encountered the Yinjiao because of this technique. However, most of the time, he knew what was happening over there from the sounds, so he could not see clearly. However, just the sound alone was enough to make it easier for Su Gu to grasp the situation. It was also for this reason that Su Gu protected this person during the battle in the desert. Although Tu Su's combat strength was almost useless, Su Gu only valued his ability to control insects. Tu Su had already told Su Lu about what happened over there. Although he did not know the details, it was true that Su Li's team had been defeated and fled. Previously, Tu Su was still puzzled as to why Su Gu ordered the team, which had already slowed down, to slow down even more once he knew that there were Yinjiao soldiers there, and that their leader was called Xiao Xian. He even took a few breaks along the way. Now Tu Su was utterly impressed by Su Gu. If Su Gu had not ordered the team to slow down, they would have definitely bumped into those Yinjiao soldiers by now. They might even have been implicated by Su Gu. Tu Su was so anxious that he was sweating profusely. On one hand, he was panicking after hearing the news. He was afraid that he would encounter the Yinjiao as well. After all, Su Gu's team composition was very similar to Su Li's. If Su Lu could only flee in defeat, how strong could Su Gu be? Secondly, after Su Gu learned of the news, he did not let the team change direction. He still maintained the original planned route. Even if they slowed down, if they kept going, would they encounter the Yinjiao people? Tu Su was perturbed. Tugging on the hat that was covering Yang Guang's face, Tu Su put the water skin away. Just as he was about to ask again, he suddenly heard a commotion in front of him. "What's that?" exclaimed the slave who was walking in front. "Young master, there seems to be..." Tu Su paused and did not finish his sentence. He just stared ahead with wide eyes. At the intersection of the desert and the sky, a golden light flashed. Something was approaching quickly, bringing with it a lot of sand and dust. Tu Su was not unfamiliar with this scene. Su Gu had used a similar method before. A golden-plated beast. "Young master, it's a golden-plated beast," Tu Su exclaimed. He was already anxious because of the news. When he saw what was running in front of him, he already had a guess. Although there were other golden-plated beasts in the desert, it was rare to see a golden-plated beast curled up into a ball and fled across the desert. Moreover, Tu Su already knew that Su Li's team was escaping. Hence, the one in front of him could very well be Su Li's golden-plated beast. Su Gu could no longer sit still. He lifted the canopy in front of him and looked at the golden ball rolling towards him. When it got closer, Su Gu was sure that it was Su Li's golden-plated beast. They saw that there were many scratches on the golden ball. They knew how hard the golden-plated beast's shell was. To be able to leave so many scratches on the golden-plated beast's body, it was clear that the opponent was very difficult to deal with. Among them, the most obvious one was a burn mark that was drawn in a large circle. To be able to force the golden-plated beast into such a state, One could imagine the battle situation at that time. It was no wonder that Su Lu did not care about his well-trained slaves. As the golden-plated beast got closer and closer to Su Gu's team, it began to slow down. Although Su Lu and Su Gu were in a state of competition, and both wished for the other to die so that they could inherit Luoya City, under such circumstances, if Su Lu were to call for help, Su Gu would still have to lend a helping hand. This was because there was another person with Su Lu, and he dared not kill that person. However, it did not matter. After all, Su Lu had failed this time. When he returned, he would definitely be punished, and Su Gu would be able to get more resources. Just as Su Gu was thinking about what to do later, the golden ball had already rolled to the front of their team. The golden ball was about to open, but it quickly closed again and rolled to the side. The golden-plated beast under Su Gu's feet began to fret. Boom! The sand rushed up, and the slaves in front hurriedly avoided it. A large blue beetle rushed out from the sand and blocked the direction of the golden-armored beast. Then, with a kick of its 2 legs, it forcefully kicked the golden-armored beast into the air. The golden ball's rolling momentum was blocked. Not only was it blocked, but it was also kicked in the opposite direction. As a result, a scene like this appeared on the sand. A large blue beetle was standing upside down, using its 2 hind legs to kick the golden ball in one direction. However, the golden ball did not want to roll in that direction. It tried its best to change direction, and for a moment, the rolling path was twisted and turned. Su Gu was speechless. What was going on? What was this blue beetle that suddenly rushed out? Young master, that big beetle is with the Yanjiao people. The insect tide might be brought by it. Tu Su was so scared that his back was covered in sweat. He hurriedly shouted to Su Gu. The moment they heard about the insect tide, Su Gu's slaves trembled. They did not want to stay and feed the insects. Su Gu did not want to stay either. He originally planned to delay until the Yanjiao people left, then he would go to the scene of the incident. Now, it seemed that it was impossible. Retreat! Leave this place immediately! After Su Gu shouted, he looked at the person sitting behind him. He was also wearing a hood. Like the people around Su Lu, he was usually very cold. After Su Gu shouted for them to retreat, that person did not object. In fact, he also wanted to go and see how the puppet slaves were doing, but the situation had changed. They should leave first. Are the Yanjiao people here too? Su Gu asked Tu Su anxiously. Tu Su was about to answer when he suddenly felt his vision go black. His head felt like it was covered by a copper bell and someone was knocking on it from the outside. It felt like it was going to explode. Tu Su knew this feeling very well. It was because the connection between him and the 2 winged insects he sent out had been severed. Those winged insects were equivalent to his slaves. There was only one way to sever the connection between him and the winged insects, and that was if the winged insects had died. On the other side, a group of black beetles spread their wings and flew towards the inconspicuous flying insect. The flying insect flew faster than the beetles, but it had lost the opportunity to escape. As more and more beetles surrounded it, its wings were finally bitten. Then, a second, a third, and even more beetles surrounded the flying insect and ate it. On the ground, the black insect tide devoured all the golden-armored slaves. Some of the slaves tried to escape, but they were cut down by the Yanjiao people and swallowed by the insect tide. The Yanjiao people tried their best to control the strange people and let Xiao Xian finish them off. This was faster, but they did not get close to the strange people. Almost every bone in the strange people's body could be a lethal weapon. The most they could do was break the bones and slow down their movements. As Su Lu distanced himself from the monster's controller, the monsters were no longer as agile as they were at the start of the battle. Truth be told, if they were separated by such a long distance, the effect would not have been so obvious. However, the hooded figure had suffered from the backlash and his control over the puppet slaves had weakened significantly. A flaming blade plunged into the chest of a strange person. The strange person pinned to the ground twitched and crackled like firewood being burned. Soon, the strange person would fall to the ground, motionless. That was when the strange people would truly die. Under the impact of the 2 forces, the bones in the strange people's bodies had changed. If one were to dissect the bones, one would find that there was only some grayish-white powder left in the bones. It looked like the ashes left behind by burning plants. This kind of destruction was irreversible. In other words, they could no longer be controlled and would soon rot, just like those who had truly died. After all the strange people were dealt with, Xiao Xian checked them one by one. After confirming that there were no longer any threats, the Yanjiao people heaved a sigh of relief. After letting the others check on the injured, Xiao Xian walked towards the small house that Su Lu had left behind. The small house was surrounded by black beetles. The other Yanjiao people did not dare to approach. Only Xiao Xian would not be attacked by these beetles. When he approached, the beetles would even make way for him. When Su Lu escaped, he did not have time to take anything else with him. In the small house surrounded by curtains, there were 2 wide lounge chairs, a low table, and a few bottles and jars filled with water and food. 2 jars with wide openings were filled with fruits. They looked fresh and juicy. In this kind of weather, who knew how many days they had walked in the desert? It was almost impossible for the fruits to remain fresh unless there was something special that kept them fresh. Xiao Xian found some egg-sized brownish-yellow stones in the jars that held the fruits and food. These stones were not very hard and Xiao Xian could crush them with just a little force. Every jar that contained food had such a stone. Obviously, this kind of stone was the reason why the food was fresh for a long time. Chapter 752. Xiao Xian didn't look at the rocks for long. He flipped through Su Li's recliner. There was a hidden compartment under the recliner, but there were only some pretty gemstones inside. Su Li might have taken away the important items. Xiao Xian stepped over the recliner and came to the recliner behind it. This was where the person controlling the strange man sat. There was another hidden compartment under the recliner. There were no gemstones inside, only a few bottles. Xiao Xian took a sniff. There were 8 bottles. 4 of them were probably used for healing or other purposes, so they shouldn't be poisonous. The other 4 gave Xiao Xian a bad feeling. They might be poison or something else. Judging from the traces in the hidden compartment, there should have been 10 bottles inside. 2 of them had been taken away, perhaps by the person before they escaped. Xiao Xian removed the hidden compartment and put it aside. He walked around the small house and changed his vision. He scanned the interior of the house. There were no other hidden compartments, but there was another level below the house. In Xiao Xian's vision, there was another person below. He could only see the skeleton, so he didn't know what the person looked like. However, Xiao Xian became alert when he saw the skeleton below. The human skeleton was very bright in Xiao Xian's vision. There was a qualitative difference between the bones of strong and weak people. In Xiao Xian's special vision, the bones of strong people were brighter. The bones below were even brighter than those of Ao and Jing Luo. Xiao Xian had never seen such bright bones on a human before. The flame on his saber that had just been extinguished reignited. Xiao Xian couldn't help but be cautious. He didn't sense the presence of a living person, nor did he sense any other energy waves. He thought that the strange man was no longer here, but who was the one below? Xiao Xian leaped out of the house. He raised his arm and slashed at the side of the house close to the ground. He could see the situation inside through the gap. There was a long wooden box inside. It looked like a coffin. The person was inside. There was still no movement. There was a long gap at the bottom of the hut, and the beetles didn't crawl in. The hut seemed to have been sprinkled with medicine, which had the effect of repelling beetles, so the beetles didn't come close. Xiao Xian looked inside for a while, then walked over and pulled out the coffin with his free hand. Strangely enough, the beetles avoided the coffin. They didn't even get close to it. After Xiao Xian dragged the coffin out and put it on the ground, the surrounding beetles avoided it. Could it be that this coffin was also sprayed with insecticide? Xian, what's that? Tower and the others did not dare to get close because of the insect horde. They could only watch from afar. Seeing Xiao Xian drag something out from under the hut, the others were also curious. I don't know, Xiao Xian said as he used the tip of his knife to pry open the lid. Inside was a shriveled person. His skin was greenish-black, and his clothes looked strange. They were very simple and tattered. The accessories looked like they had been there for a long time. They would break with a pinch, and it was impossible to tell what they originally looked like. Judging from the clothes and accessories, this corpse should have been left here for a long time. However, this corpse looked similar to the other monsters that had been controlled. Its entire body was shriveled, and there were clear traces of ribs. Its abdomen was sunken, but there were no signs of it being torn open. The other monsters had signs of rupture because their organs were removed, but this one didn't. Was it because the people from Rock Hill City didn't have time to do it, or did they deliberately not do it? Or was there another reason? A hawk screeched outside. Xiao Xian stopped looking at the person and closed the lid again. This kind of monster was not suitable for Yang Guang. Otherwise, the controllers wouldn't have covered their bodies with thick cloth to hide Yang Guang. Cha-Cha did not participate in the close combat. It had been watching from the sky to prevent others from approaching and attacking them. Now, Cha-Cha warned them again. This time, it was not an enemy attack, but Sapphire's return. Even without Cha-Cha's warning, Xiao Xian could sense it. However, Sapphire looked miserable. Its forelimbs and hind legs were severely injured. One of its forelimbs was missing, and the other was not in good condition either. Its hind legs and forelimbs were in similar condition. There were many impact marks on its back. It was a smooth arc, but it looked like it had been smashed. Sapphire didn't look this bad when it came out of the sand and chased after the golden armored beast. Clearly, this was the result of its continued pursuit. When Sapphire returned, it was pushing a sandball. It liked to roll its spoils into a ball and push it around. When Sapphire pushed the ball upside down, the sandball was slightly taller than it. On the sandball, there were two pieces of golden hard armor that shone brightly under the sun. They were two segments of hard armor from the golden armored beast's body. There was still flesh on them. They had been forcefully removed from the golden armored beast's body. Xiao Xian shifted his gaze from the sandball to Sapphire, who was already in front of him. Upon closer inspection, Xiao Xian noticed that Sapphire's shovel-like head was slightly crooked. Its two paddle-shaped antennae drooped down like folded antennae. When Sapphire chased after the golden armored beast, Xiao Xian didn't let it fight to the death. He didn't expect Sapphire to pursue to this extent. Sapphire seemed to be in a hurry to explain something. Due to the connection between their consciousnesses, Xiao Xian could roughly guess why it couldn't bring Su Lu and the controller here. Su Lu and the others had reinforcements. Otherwise, Sapphire wouldn't have ended up in such a sorry state. Sapphire rolled the sandball in front of Xiao Xian, indicating that it wanted Xiao Xian to examine its results. Its two folded antennae swayed anxiously and nervously. Seeing Sapphire's reaction, Xiao Xian smiled. He cut open the sandball with his saber and dug out two pieces of shiny, ring-shaped hard armor from the sandball. There was no one inside, but there were two small bottles. Xiao Xian guessed that they were together with the 8 bottles he found in the hidden compartment of the hut. Perhaps they were dropped when Sapphire was chasing after them. The opening of the bottle was tightly sealed. Xiao Xian examined it. The bottle wasn't broken. The medicine inside had a refreshing smell that refreshed one's spirit. It was probably a healing medicine. Other than these, Xiao Xian also dug out a palm-sized green metal plate from the sandball. There were words engraved on it, the number 22 foot. Putting aside the meaning of this number, the palm-sized metal plate in Xiao Xian's hand was similar to Yanjiao's new bronze. It was probably made from the blood of a green-faced fanged beast that the people of Rock Hill City had captured. However, its quality was slightly better than that of Yanjiao's, and it was also more exquisite. Looking at the nervous giant blue beetle in front of him, Xiao Xian asked, "Do you want to unlock the last lock?" Sapphire's two antennae shook. The folded section seemed to lift up, and its hind legs that were missing a section kicked the sand. It was agitated. Xiao Xian didn't intend to unlock the 5th lock so soon. Sapphire had just woken up not long after the 4th lock was unlocked. Unlocking the 5th lock so soon would be risky. Secondly, Xiao Xian thought about it the most. The more slaves he unlocked, the stronger he would become. Many slaves who broke free from their shackles relied on their talents and willpower after unlocking the 2nd and 3rd locks. Sapphire's body was different from the other slaves with 3 locks. When Xiao Xian enslaved it, he placed 5 locks on it. So far, he had already unlocked 4. Xiao Xian didn't know if the giant blue beetle would break free from his control after unlocking the 5th lock. It might even break free from his enslavement. However, he didn't know when he would return after leaving the desert this time. Would the injured Sapphire be targeted by the people of Rock Hill City? What would happen when that happened? Xiao Xian couldn't predict it. He didn't manage to capture Su Li's men this time. With Su Li's vengeful personality, he would definitely do everything in his power to seek revenge. Yanjiao was too far away from the desert. The possibility of Su Li leaving the desert wasn't high. Thus, he could only target Sapphire. The insect swarm was too big a target. It wasn't impossible for Su Li to find Sapphire. He could even set up some traps to lure the swarm. There were many factors to consider. If he wasn't careful, the knife in his hand could become a tool to stab himself. However, Sapphire's performance this time made Xiao Xian decide to unlock the fifth lock. Ji Ju once said that the loyalty of the first slave was much higher than that of the other slaves. Xiao Xian was willing to take a gamble. Even if Sapphire really broke free in the future, it wouldn't turn against Xiao Xian. Other than Sapphire, Xiao Xian also noticed during this trip to the desert that Sapphire was faintly influencing the other beetles that followed it. There were changes in the swarm. Some beetles were larger than the others. When Sapphire was in hibernation, these beetles led the swarm to sweep the desert. Every time they swept, beetles would die and new beetles would join them. The swarm had expanded compared to before. However, based on the conditions here, the number of beetles in the swarm would eventually fluctuate within a certain range. If there were too many beetles, they wouldn't be able to survive with limited food. However, the future of the swarm still depended on Sapphire. A swarm with a leader was completely different from a swarm without one. A swarm with a leader knew how to coordinate strategically, while a swarm without a leader would be more disorganized and wouldn't survive for long. "I wonder what you'll look like after you're fully unlocked," muttered Xiao Xian as he watched the giant beetle kick its legs excitedly. After the swarm of insects retreated, the Yanjiao people removed the armor from the slaves that had been beaten to the bone. In Gongjia Ren's words, these were good materials for forging. The 2 pieces of golden armor that Sapphire brought back were also taken away by the Yanjiao people. Xiao Xian carried the coffin-like wooden box, planning to study it when he got back. The group didn't stay for long. After a short rest, they left in case the people from Rock Hill City came. When they were about to reach the edge of the desert, Xiao Xian unlocked the 5th lock for Sapphire. Perhaps after unlocking all the locks, Sapphire could become a king beast like other fearsome beasts. Chapter 753. After unlocking the 5th lock, Sapphire burrowed into the depths of the sand and fell into a deep slumber. Xiao Xian didn't know when Sapphire would be able to complete this phase. If everything went well, Sapphire would grow stronger and recover from its injuries. Every time Sapphire woke up from its slumber after unlocking the lock, it would undergo such changes. However, if things didn't go well, not only would Sapphire's injuries be unable to heal, but there would also be negative side effects. The Yanjiao tribe was quite a distance away from the desert. Even if something went wrong, Xiao Xian wouldn't be able to arrive in time. Sapphire could only rely on itself. They didn't encounter many Rock Hill City people along the way. The ones they did encounter were small squads, probably patrolling. When they saw the Yanjiao team, they didn't initiate an attack. Those troops were made up of normal slaves and not monsters. Now that the desert was far away from Rock Hill City's territory, it was rare to see those monsters. Perhaps it was because of the war at the seaside that all of them were transferred there. Hence, Xiao Xian's team didn't encounter much trouble after Sulu. They traveled at night and found a place to rest during the day when it was hot. They were wearing the golden armor they stripped from Su Li's slaves. Before Sapphire was unlocked, it was only used as a porter. After that, the Yanjiao people carried it themselves. The weight of the golden armor was nothing to them. They could even carry it on their backs to hunt sand beasts. Although the armor was indeed useful, wearing it restricted one's movements and one could not get used to it. That was why the Flaming Horns decided to take these armors back and melt them down for recasting. Perhaps they could even make a few decent weapons. "We're finally leaving this godforsaken place," Tower said as he looked ahead. Cha-Cha had already flown out of the desert to find the Yanjiao people waiting outside. They would come to their aid. The sandstorm rose again, blurring their vision. However, they could still sense the approaching Yinjiao people. Boss. Grand Elder. Someone ran over. Did it go well? Oh, did you rob them? The person who came over took the armor. This type of equipment was obviously used by the slaves in the desert. I ran into some trouble along the way. After I've solved it, I'll take it back with me, Tower said simply. Looking at the strangers in the group, the receptionist asked, Are they the Gongjia family? Yes, that's them. Once they were out of the desert, Ta's mood lightened. He introduced the 6 Gongjia members to the people who were waiting for them. To make it easier for them to understand, Ta used the language of the other side of the sea. Although it wasn't fluent, at least they could understand. The helper looked at the coffin-like thing Xiao Xian was carrying. He wanted to help Xiao Xian carry it, but Xiao Xian refused. Xiao Xian wasn't sure if this thing was dangerous, so it was better for him to carry it. At least if the person in the coffin was really being controlled, he would be able to detect the energy fluctuations immediately. If it was someone else, it might not be the same. The helper didn't ask any more questions. After receiving them, they wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. Now that their mission was complete, they had to hurry back. They couldn't get used to this place. They felt uncomfortable just waiting outside the desert, let alone those who had entered the desert. Let's go back. Tower and the rest didn't want to stay here for a moment longer. Although they were exhausted from rushing through the desert, they still pushed on. Weeds gradually grew on the sand. They were no longer surrounded by yellow sand. The greenery made their surroundings feel more alive. Not just the Yinjiao people, even the Gongjia members felt like they had been reborn. The desert was a nightmare and they almost couldn't escape from it. Fortunately, it was all over now. Arriving at a new place, everything was new to the 6 Gongjia members. The air was unfamiliar. The area where the tribesmen lived was very different from where they came from. On the other side of the sea, there were many people coming and going. Therefore, there were often small trails near the cities. Here, however, there were very few people. There were a lot of forests and some areas with poor soil were completely devoid of people. Only flocks of wild birds could be seen flying around. There weren't many caravans coming and going here. Occasionally, they would see some small traveling teams. Many people were still holding stone tools and horns. Their clothes weren't that exquisite, and they didn't even have gems. Their values were different, so naturally, their accessories were different. When they saw the Yinjiao people, these teams looked nervous. Some of them wanted to rob the Yinjiao people when they saw the gold weapons they were carrying. In the end, they failed and were robbed instead. Later on, to avoid unnecessary trouble, the Yinjiao people used some vines and leaves to weave baskets. They hid the gold armors in the baskets and carried them on their backs. Although they weren't afraid of robbers, they didn't want to waste time on these things. The 6 Gongjia members followed the team and continued forward. They felt much more at ease. It seemed that the tribesmen here weren't much different from what they had imagined, especially the small tribesmen who lived in remote areas. They were still wearing clothes made from plant fibers. Their hair was unkempt, probably stained from searching for food in the forest. Their eyes were vigilant as they watched the Yinjiao team passing by. If the Yinjiao people hadn't told Gongjia Ren that these were just small tribesmen, he would have thought they were slaves. Don't underestimate the small tribesmen. There must be a reason why they're still alive. Xiao Xian warned the 6 Gongjia members. The small tribesmen might be behind in terms of material resources, but they might not lose to them in terms of survival. If they were thrown into the desert with the Gongjia members, they would definitely live longer than them. In fact, the Yinjiao tribes weren't much better off than these small tribesmen. When did the tribes start to change? Ta thought about it. It seemed like after Xiao Xian brought them across the river, the change in the tribe was out of control. After witnessing the scene on the road, Gongjia Ren and the rest couldn't help but wonder what the Yinjiao tribes were like. What the Yinjiao people described in the desert, were they telling the truth? The surrounding forest was getting denser and denser, and more people were coming and going. Those people were more particular about their clothes, and their clothes and tools were more complicated. When a road opened up in the forest, the 6 Gongjia members were informed that they were approaching the Flaming River trading point. Gongjia Ren understood that there were similar roads near the cities on the other side of the sea. When the traveling team saw the Yanjiao people, they automatically stepped aside to make way for the Yanjiao people. In fact, this road was wide enough for two teams to walk side by side. However, this place had already entered the area of influence of the Flaming Horns tribe. The strong were respected, so they took the initiative to give way, showing a weak attitude. Stepping onto a stone path, the 6 Gongjia members looked at the stone ground beneath their feet and clicked their tongues in wonder. There were no signs of stones joining together. The stone path beneath their feet was a single piece. There were also some petrified flowers and trees near the path. Even the fine thorns on the leaves were clear as day. "This is the stone path made by the king beast?" asked Gongjia Ren. "Yes, this is it. Other than the king beast, who else could make something like this?" answered Ta. After receiving confirmation, Gongjia Ren was in disbelief. How dare the Yanjiao tribes live here? If they lived on the other side of the sea, they would have evacuated the moment they heard of the king beast. Who would dare to live here like the Yanjiao? What is that? Gongjia Kan, who was beside Gongjia Ren, lifted his head and looked into the distance. Through the branches, he saw a towering building with a flag-like object fluttering at the top. It was a flaming horn totem. "That's the Flaming River Tower, the tallest place in the Flaming River trading point. That's our trading point." The Yanjiao people spoke with pride. "Is it really like the city?" exclaimed Gongjia Ren, looking at the building. As they got closer, the trading point finally appeared before them. "Everyone, welcome to the Yanjiao tribe." Chapter 754. The 6 Gongjia members were led around the streets of the trading point to familiarize themselves with the place. Although the scale of the trading point could not be compared to the famous cities on the other side of the sea, it was still much better than the smaller cities that were built later on. It was clear that the Yanjiao people had put in a lot of effort to build this trading point. However, this was not the end of the Flaming River trading point. According to the Yanjiao people, they would continue to expand. Now that the land had been fenced, it was hard to say how big the trading point would be. Even though it was similar to a city, the environment here was obviously different from the other side of the sea. The shops here were not complicated and there were not many types of products. It was obvious that they were built in a tribal style. Other than the resting inns, the shops selling fearsome beast meat, horns and fangs were the most crowded places. The place was filled with a more primitive and wild atmosphere. "This is unbelievable. I can't believe it's like this," exclaimed the oldest of the 6, Gongjia Kansas. Although the Yanjiao people had introduced them to the trading point on the way here, they were still shocked when they saw it for themselves. It really was different from the rumors. "Looks like we made the right choice," sighed Gongjia Ren. The others nodded in agreement. This place was much better than they had imagined. They were willing to start a new life in a place like this. "They don't have a unified currency here." "That's right, metalwares are rare here, so they barter with other things." Gongjia Kan observed their surroundings carefully. One of the Yanjiao warriors couldn't help but say, "Actually, the Grand Elder has the idea of a unified currency, but he hasn't implemented it yet due to certain reasons." Gongjia Ren's interest was piqued. He asked, "Then did the Grand Elder mention anything about the currency? Shells? Animal bones? Or animal fangs?" The Yanjiao warrior kept quiet. Before the Grand Elder made the decision, they would not reveal too much. Gongjia Ren could only give up. These Yanjiao people were very stubborn. If they did not want to talk, it would be hard to pry them out of them. However, Gongjia Ren kept this question to himself. While Gongjia Ren and the rest were being led around the trading point, Xiao Xian carried the coffin-like wooden box to the secret underground room. He wouldn't bring something that he wasn't sure if it was a threat to the headquarters, so he could only leave it here. "This is very similar to the monsters in the desert," Zheng Luo said after opening the lid and taking a look. "Similar but different." Zheng Luo remembered what the weirdo from the Hui tribe looked like. Although this one was similar to those shriveled weirdos, there were many differences. "Are they complete?" Zheng Luo asked. Although the person inside was shriveled, there were no wounds on his body. His abdomen was deeply sunken, but unlike those strange people who only had a layer of flesh and bones left, there were still things inside. Perhaps they were shriveled organs. Just like the shriveled flesh on this person's body, those organs might also be shriveled up. He hasn't been controlled yet? Or is there another reason? Jingluo was puzzled. According to what you said, there must be a reason why the slave owner brought him along. I think it's because the person who controlled the weirdos couldn't control this one. Xiao Xian wouldn't bring this corpse into the trading point without any clues. He had tested it several times on the way here. This person must have been strong when he was alive, no weaker than you and Ao. His bones are very hard. You know, for Yanjiao's totemic warriors, the stronger they are, the harder their bones are. Of course, Zhengluo knew this. If a beginner totemic warrior and an advanced totemic warrior hit a stone of the same quality, the former would be injured but the latter would be able to shatter the stone directly. Increasing one's strength would strengthen one's body and bones would be a part of it. This person's bones were very hard. Even if he wasn't outstanding in other aspects when he was alive, just the toughness of his bones was enough to measure his strength. This person must have been dead for a long time. Xiao Xian pinched the unrecognizable ornaments on the corpse's body. With just a little force, a cracking sound could be heard. These ornaments should have been very hard when they were made, just like the bones and teeth of the fearsome beasts we use. It's just that some other things happened and a long time has passed, so they've become fragile. Even so, they're still harder than the bones of normal beasts, Xiao Xian explained. Jingluo understood what Xiao Xian was trying to say. These ornaments were probably made from fearsome beasts' bones and were very hard when they were first made. In other words, those fearsome beasts were not easy to deal with. How could the people who hunted them be weak? Yes, different species of fearsome beasts had different degrees of hardness. Perhaps a weaker fearsome beast had tougher bones, but Jingluo and Xiao Xian believed in their guesses. They were also a tribe that focused on hunting, so they understood how tribesmen thought. As for ornaments, they preferred the more dangerous and aggressive fearsome beasts. That was the best way to show off their strength and status. The people of Rock Hill City liked to find strong totemic warriors or slaves to make into strange puppets. This one might be one of their targets, but this one is different from the others. Xiao Xian pointed at the person lying in the box. There's some residual power in his bones, similar to the power of the monsters we met in the desert. But it's too little. It can't even control a small piece of bone, let alone a whole person. The residual power must have been left behind by the people of Rock Hill City when they tried to control it. They failed, so they left it until now. Ever since they left the desert, Xiao Xian had not sensed any signs of life from this wooden box. This person should be dead. But how could a lifeless corpse that was not frozen, treated with medicine, or controlled by other forces be preserved in such a state without rotting? Back then, the pterosaur and the other insects had been preserved for so long because they were frozen. So how did this corpse, which looked like it had been dead for a long time without rotting, stay in this state? He did not have the bone ornaments worn by Yanjiao's ancestors. Xiao Xian, have you tried to control it? Asked Jingluo. He knew that Xiao Xian could imitate the people of Rock Hill City and use a similar method to control a corpse. Xiao Xian shook his head. I tried once on the way back, but it didn't work. But I was in a rush and had limited time, so I didn't take it seriously. I'll try again after I settle the Gongjia people down. Jingluo also hoped that Xiao Xian could control this shriveled monster. If he succeeded, they would have another ally. Should we send someone to guard this place today? Asked Jingluo. Xiao Xian was going to bring the 6 Gongjia people to the headquarters, so he couldn't stay here forever. When Xiao Xian left, they still had to send someone to guard this place just in case. Do you want me to do it myself? Asked Jingluo. No need. I have someone more suitable. Seeing that Xiao Xian had rejected his suggestion, Jingluo was curious about who Xiao Xian was referring to. Xiao Xian opened the door to the secret room and walked out to wait for a while. Someone came over. It was the guard at the top of the flaming river tower. The pterosaur was perched on his shoulder. You've gained weight. Xiao Xian compared the pterosaur's appearance before he left to its current appearance. This pterosaur had been living a carefree life while he was gone. Xiao Xian could now control the pterosaur at the headquarters. Although it wasn't as precise as when he was close to the headquarters, it was enough to make the pterosaur fly over obediently. No matter how impudent the pterosaur usually was in front of the Yanjiao people, it was very obedient now. It raised its head to look at Xiao Xian, then lowered its head as if it didn't dare to approach. A while ago, when Xiao Xian wasn't around, the pterosaur couldn't be controlled due to the distance. Every day, the pterosaur would lead the group of ill-trained bitter leaf birds to steal food from the patrolling soldiers. It would even throw fish bones at them. However, everyone knew that this pterosaur belonged to Xiao Xian. The two retired shamans also valued the pterosaur, so no matter how angry they were, they couldn't do anything to the pterosaur. All they could do was scold it. At first, it was useful. Later on, they used words to scare it. Forget about the pterosaur, it didn't even care about the group of birds. Xiao Xian already knew this from the people on duty at the trading point. This is the one you said is more suitable? Jing Luo looked at the chubby pterosaur in disbelief. What else could it do? It's more suitable than the others. Xiao Xian walked over and grabbed the pterosaur's wings. He carried the unwilling pterosaur into the secret room. He pointed at the cage that hadn't been used for a long time. You'll sleep here tonight. Chapter 755. The pterosaur thought it could finally see the light of day again. It had already gotten used to its new living environment after spending so much time outside. However, Xiao Xian threw it back into this quiet underground secret room. The pterosaur was traumatized by this underground secret room. It had woken up here. In other words, it was here that it was reborn. At the same time, it was also here that Xiao Xian controlled it. It could still vividly remember the fear it felt when every bone in its body lost control. The pterosaur knew it could not resist, so it had no choice but to accept its fate. It cried out a few times to vent its anger but immediately shut up when it saw Xiao Xian look over. After placing some food and water in the secret room, Xiao Xian and Jing Luo walked out. The stone door to the secret room was also closed. It's very smart, said Jing Luo. This was the truth. Even the patrolling warriors who were angered by the pterosaur had to admit this. The creature that looked like a bird was much smarter than most animals. It had a strong learning ability and knew how to avoid harm. It could see the situation clearly. Just like now, it did not want to be locked in this cramped underground secret room. However, it did not dare to resist, so it could only stay inside obediently without any resistance. It's because it's smart and sensitive to danger that I put it in here. Also, when I left the tribe a while ago, it was indeed restless. I have to punish it. It won't be able to leave for the next few days, said Xiao Xian. Knowing that Xiao Xian had a plan, Jing Luo did not say anything else. He was still very much looking forward to Xiao Xian controlling the corpse. Although Jing Luo did not go to the desert, he heard from the people who came back about the abilities of the monsters. It was indeed terrifying. Without Xiao Xian, the people who entered the desert might not have made it out alive. What do you plan to do with the Gongjia family? Asked Jing Luo as they walked towards the top of the flaming river castle. On the way here, they said that as long as Yanjiao accepts them, they would be willing to forge weapons for us. Gongjiaran also said that forging was a part of their lives. They might not be willing to be idle. It's just a win-win situation. However, they also said that the core skills of forging will not be passed on to outsiders. Jing Luo was a little disappointed to hear that the craftsmanship would not be taught to outsiders, but he could understand. He thought about it. As long as the Gongjia family made things for Yanjiao, that would be enough. Jing Luo pointed at the knife in Xiao Xian's hand. Can you mass-produce this kind of metal weapon? With the materials we have now, we can only make about 100 of them, Xiao Xian said. We've already replenished them with new crystals. It will take time to make more. Jing Luo nodded. 100 was a lot. It was better than he had expected. If these metal weapons were easier to use, new bronze would gradually be replaced. However, truly being replaced was also a relatively long process. It was still too early to think about that now. The material used to forge Xiao Xian's knife was produced from crystals. To distinguish it from other metal weapons, they called it crystal gold. However, the existence of crystal gold was not made public by the Yanjiao tribe. Not many people even knew about it. After leaving the Flaming River Castle, Xiao Xian brought the 6 Gongjia members who had toured the trading point to the headquarters. The great bridge of the flaming river that looked like it was floating on the surface of the water shocked the 6 Gongjia members once again. They even thought that if there was such a bridge between the 2 continents, they could bypass the battlefield and travel between the 2 continents. However, on second thought, it was good that there was no bridge. Since they had already left the other side, they might not be able to return even if they died. There was no need to keep thinking about the bridge. Freshman, Gongjiren looked at the mountain in Yanjiao's headquarters. He could see the houses and people moving around on the mountain. The 6 Gongjia members did not raise a high profile when they entered Yanjiao's headquarters. They did not want to attract too much attention for the time being. Perhaps it was because they were on the run that they had developed a habit of keeping a low profile. Since the 6 Gongjia members agreed, Xiao Xian did not insist. He brought them to the place they wanted to visit the most, the forging room. After the cauldron explosion last time, in order to forge the knife in Xiao Xian's hand, they temporarily built a casting room dedicated to forging crystal gold. Although there were new types of gold, the Flaming Horn tribe still mainly used new bronze. A casting room for bronze had to be built, so a new casting room for bronze had to be built. Xiao Xian did not see it before he left. When he returned, he saw a new forging room that was about the same size as the previous one. The 6 Gongjia members discussed this with Xiao Xian. They hoped that Yanjiao could build a forging room for each of them. The Gongjia family's craftsmen would only gather together unless they were called by their masters to teach them skills or when they needed to work together. Most of the time, they liked to stay in their own place and study. Since they started learning how to forge, they spent more time in the forging room than in their bedrooms at home. They could not ask for too much in Yanjiao. Hence, they discussed with Xiao Xian whether he could build 6 forging rooms for each of them. As for the houses, they did not need to build another one. They only needed to build a small house next to the forging room. They could make do with everything else, including living quarters. However, they could not make do with the forging room. Years of obsessive-compulsive disorder would not change in a short period of time. This was not a difficult task for Yanjiao. After all, this place was big enough. The forging rooms were built according to the design that the 6 of them were used to. With the 6 of them personally watching over the forging room, Xiao Xian did not have to stay there all the time. After making arrangements for the 6 Gongjia members, Xiao Xian returned to the mountain. He held a small meeting at the top of the mountain and briefly told the others about his trip. He also told them about the ancient corpse he brought back. Like Xing Luo, the others also hoped that Xiao Xian would be able to control a monster. That night, Xiao Xian stayed at the headquarters and did not go to the Flaming River trading point. At night, in the secret underground chamber of the Flaming River Castle, the pterosaur who was locked in the secret chamber finished the beast meat that Xiao Xian had left for him. It was bored, so it used its sharp claws to scratch the ground. Then, it looked at the long wooden box that Xiao Xian had placed on the stone table. It flapped its wings and flew up to the stone table. Because the wooden box was damaged during the process of being transported here, there were gaps of varying sizes even when it was closed. After circling the wooden box, the pterosaur found a slightly bigger gap on the side and squeezed in. If it had just woken up not long ago, it would have been able to squeeze in. However, now that it had grown fatter, it was harder to squeeze in. It was stuck there. Using its mouth and claws, the pterosaur widened the gap and squeezed in with much difficulty. It did not like the smell inside, but it did not feel any signs of life. If it was a corpse that had just died not long ago, it would still eat it when it was hungry. However, the corpse in front of it had been dead for who knows how long. It did not have any appetite at all. Moreover, it had been spoiled during its time in the wild. It did not like the corpse in front of it at all. Instead, it stepped on the corpse and walked back and forth curiously. It pecked at the stones and bones that seemed to have been separated for a long time. After pecking an ornament into pieces, it stepped on the corpse's chest and walked up to the human face. The shriveled face no longer had its original appearance. The protruding cheekbones were more prominent, the eyes were sunken, and all the hair had fallen out. The pterosaur walked on the human face for a while and rummaged through the coffin-like wooden box. It did not find anything that interested it, so it came out from inside. It thought that Xiao Xian would punish it severely. However, it did not expect that it would only be locked up here. There were no other creatures, so there was nothing to worry about. After circling the secret room again, the pterosaur flew back to the cage to sleep. It was active during the day. Its ability to move at night was not as strong as during the day, so it used it to rest. The next day, Xiao Xian went to the trading point from the headquarters. When he opened the door to the secret room, the pterosaur was still sleeping in the cage. It only woke up when it heard the noise. When it saw the food in Xiao Xian's hands, it was completely awake. At this time, it was not afraid of Xiao Xian anymore. With a flap of its wings, the pterosaur glided from the cage to Xiao Xian. Looking around, Xiao Xian found that the secret room was not messed up except for the dragon feces. He threw the meat in his hand to the pterosaur and let it eat it. There were scratches and bite marks on the wooden box on the stone table. When he opened the lid, Xiao Xian saw the ornaments that had been bitten. There were also some footprints on the ancient corpse. Xiao Xian had sensed these last night and knew what the pterosaur had done last night. It was also because he knew that it did not destroy the ancient corpse that Xiao Xian brought it food. While the pterosaur was gnawing on the food, Xiao Xian planned to try to control the ancient corpse. At that time, the pterosaur was still alive, so Xiao Xian did not make a move right away. Instead, he waited until the pterosaur had failed to resist. That was to increase the success rate. Now, Xiao Xian did not need to wait. It was even easier to enslave an inanimate object. However, with the failure on the way back, Xiao Xian was more careful this time. He did not need to worry about robbers jumping out from the surroundings, so he could concentrate more. Raising his hand, Xiao Xian drew out the power of the Yinjiao fire seed in his body. Similar to the pterosaur, he used the power of the Yinjiao fire seed to try to control it. Similarly, he did not completely separate the power of the Yinjiao fire seed from the other power in his body. He allowed them to be drawn out at the same time. This way, the success rate would be higher. With the appearance of the totem pattern, Xiao Xian raised his hand and a flame appeared. He reached his hand above the ancient corpse and slowly pressed it down. He did not know how long this ancient corpse had been stored, but the bones were very active. Otherwise, the people of Rock Hill City would not have brought it along. A corpse without any activity was useless to the people of Rock Hill City. They would have thrown it away long ago. However, since the people of Rock Hill City kept it, it proved that it had a higher value. Because of this, Xiao Xian planned to try a few more times. However, Xiao Xian soon realized that the situation was the same as before. The power of the fire seed could not penetrate deeply. The last time when Xiao Xian enslaved the pterosaur, he did not encounter any resistance. The flame carried the power of the fire seed and directly penetrated the pterosaur's skin and muscles, seeping into every bone. However, this time, Xiao Xian felt a repulsion. On the way back, when Xiao Xian failed, he also encountered a repulsion. However, because he had to take care of the surrounding situation, he could not continue. Xiao Xian did not stop. Instead, he increased the active power in his body and the flame in his hand grew bigger. The pterosaur had already abandoned its food and retreated to the corner when the flame appeared in Xiao Xian's hand. Now, it even tightened its wings, similar to how it was when it was frozen. Xiao Xian increased the power of the flame. When the flame penetrated the flesh, he could feel a clear resistance. It felt like he was going against a current. However, this was not the case. Every time the flame was about to penetrate the bones, it was as if it had encountered a hard shield and was strongly repelled. The more power the flame penetrated, the stronger the repelling force. After Xiao Xian increased the power of the flame, the feeling became clearer. There was no mistaking it. With such a strong repelling force, Xiao Xian's plan could not be carried out. It was no wonder that the people from Rock Hill City had not succeeded. Dead creatures could not resist. They had no consciousness and could not control their own bodies. However, this ancient corpse was actually repelling the power of Yanjiao's fire seed. How was this possible? However, everything in front of him was real. Unless, this ancient corpse was actually alive. However, it did not have any signs of life. This confused Xiao Xian because he could not explain it. Xiao Xian retracted his hand and thought for a moment. After a while, Xiao Xian raised his hand again. This time, he used another type of power in his body. He did not use the power of Yanjiao's fire seed. The uniqueness of this ancient corpse was that even though it was dead, the reaction of its bones was similar to that of a living person. The reason why living people were not suitable for this type of controlled enslavement was because of the repelling force of the main body. Not to mention the wanderer slaves, when the other tribesmen were alive, they had the power of the fire seed in their bodies. Even tribesmen who did not merge with the fire seed had the power of totems in their bodies. Totems were another form of the fire seed's power. Totems originated from the fire seed. The fire seed's repelling force would cause it to repel the power of other tribes' fire seeds. This was why Xiao Xian encountered resistance every time he tried to make a move. Therefore, Xiao Xian decided to withdraw the power of Yanjiao's fire seed and use another type of power in his body to try. The reason why Xiao Xian was not strongly repelled by the other tribe's fire seeds was because of this power. This time, a white flame appeared in Xiao Xian's hand, and he pressed his hand down. As Xiao Xian's hand approached, the white flame began to extend downwards, seeping into the ancient corpse's dark, dry skin and flesh. He didn't encounter any obstacles like the previous one, which was like going against the wind. Xiao Xian's heart calmed down a little. It seemed that he had made the right choice. The flame that seeped into the skin and flesh continued to seep in, touching the ancient corpse's bones. Then, the strong repelling force disappeared, as if a solid shield had been removed. It was unimpeded. The high activity of the ancient corpse's bones allowed them to quickly absorb the power of the flame that seeped in. Xiao Xian used his special vision to check. Just like the pterosaur, the ancient corpse's bones seemed to have been dyed white by the flame that seeped into it. However, there was no blood flow. The white color only existed in the bones and did not seep into the blood vessels and meridians. This was different from the pterosaur. That's right, an ancient corpse was not like the pterosaur. After all, it was a lifeless body. Naturally, there was no blood flow. The blood vessels and meridians were all damaged. The monsters controlled by Rock Hill City were the same. Did he succeed? Xiao Xian retracted his hand and extinguished the flame in his hand. Then he used his mind. The ancient corpse on the stone table did not respond. Xiao Xian frowned. This was not right. Didn't he succeed just now? Why couldn't he control it? He tried a few more times, but the result was the same. He could affect the power that seeped into the bones, but he could not control the ancient corpse like he did the pterosaur. When Xiao Xian tried to control the pterosaur, he also used the same method on other dead beasts. According to his past experience, he should have succeeded by now, but he could not control it. After much effort, he finally managed to seep the power into the bones, but he could not control it. Xiao Xian still could not figure out the reason. He was troubled. Just as Xiao Xian was pondering the reason, Jin Luo came down to call him. It was Gongjia Ren. He wanted to ask about the forging of crystal gold. Gongjia Ren and the rest had only come into contact with bronze wares. In fact, there were a small number of Gongjia family members who had come into contact with other types of metal wares. Naturally, they knew that there was more than one type of metal wares, but they had never come into contact with them before. That was why they were very interested in new types of metal wares. Before their own forging room was completed, they could not wait to interact with the Yinjiao craftsmen who had participated in the forging of crystal gold. They asked many questions in high spirits, but the Yinjiao craftsmen could not answer them. Gongjia Ren could not resist the temptation. Coincidentally, Duo Kong had brought his hunting results from the headquarters to the trading point, so he followed along. Thinking about the Gongjia family's persistence, Xiao Xian thought about it and decided to explain everything to them. He would definitely stay here for a few more days because of the ancient corpse. This time, he had to explain everything to prevent Gongjia Ren from coming over to ask again. He ordered the Yinjiao warriors to stand guard outside the secret chamber in case anything happened inside. Xiao Xian went to look for Gongjia Ren first. The stone door closed. Other than the ancient corpse on the stone table, there was only the pterosaur huddled in the corner of the room. After Xiao Xian left, the pterosaur cautiously crawled towards the stone table from the corner. It was frightened by the flames on Xiao Xian's hand, but after Xiao Xian left, it became bolder and flew to the stone table to take a look at this strange person. Other than a similar aura to the pterosaur, there was nothing different about the ancient corpse from last night. Losing interest, the pterosaur glided down from the stone table and continued to eat the food it had not finished. As it chewed, the pterosaur suddenly paused, as if uncertain. Its body stiffened as it sensed carefully, then it quickly threw the food away and huddled in the corner again. It folded its wings and carefully peered at the stone table. Thin red lines appeared on the shriveled body of the ancient corpse on the stone table. They intersected like tree branches and gradually spread to every part of its body, growing denser and denser. Those were where the blood vessels and meridians were located. They were also carriers of energy. Xiao Xian did not think this would happen, but now it did. The shriveled and stiff body emitted a faint crackling sound. If one looked closely, they would notice that the skin and flesh on the shriveled parts were changing. However, the changes were not drastic and were not obvious. The sunken parts of the ancient corpse's eyes moved, as if something was rolling underneath. The arms on both sides of the corpse trembled slightly, its fingers moving up and down. At first, it was only 1 or 2 fingers, but soon, the 3rd, 5th and eventually the entire wrist was twisting. The ancient corpse suddenly sat up, scaring the pterosaur that was cowering in the corner. If Xiao Xian was here, he would definitely be surprised. Not only because of the ancient corpse's behavior, but also because the person who sat up had no heartbeat. Chapter 756. On the stone table, the person who was sitting up twisted his neck, making a cracking sound. The dry and hard skin on his neck made his movements a little stiff, like a rusty machine. His movements were halting. The water moonstones were placed in the secret underground room. Perhaps it was because of the light. The person who sat up on the stone table turned his neck to look at the place where the water moonstones were placed. His sunken eyes moved and his eyelids opened bit by bit like a stuck window. It was like a beast that had been sleeping for a long time. The moment he opened his eyes, an invisible murderous aura and bloodthirsty aura surged out. His blood-red eyes stared straight ahead. The pterosaur in the corner didn't dare to make a sound. It tried its best to reduce its presence. It wanted to leave this place as far as possible, but other than the ventilation hole, there was no other place connected to the outside. And it couldn't crawl out of the ventilation hole. The person who sat up stared in the direction of the water moonstone. His red eyes moved, and then he twisted his neck and looked around. No emotion could be seen on his dry and hard face. Combined with this scene, it was quite a strange scene. Crack, crack, crack. Following the strange movements, the person who sat up turned around and got down from the stone table. When he stood on the ground, he seemed to be a little uncomfortable. His movements were very slow, and he even paused for a moment after he steadied himself. He looked at himself, and then looked around. His gaze stopped at some of the tools in the room, such as a water jar, a metalware, and the cage in which the pterosaur slept. Finally, he retracted his gaze and lowered his head to look at what he was wearing. He raised his hand and picked up the necklace that he was wearing. The animal bones and stones on it were no longer the same as before. The changes were great. Some parts of the necklace were empty, and some parts were broken. He used his stiff fingers to pinch an irregularly shaped ornament on the necklace. His fingers exerted force, and with a cracking sound, the stone ornament was broken into pieces. Stone powder fell to the ground. The person looked at the stone fragments in his hand. No one knew what he was thinking, or he seemed to be in a daze. After a while, he raised his head and looked around again. The Yanjiao soldier standing guard outside the secret chamber didn't know what was going on inside, nor did he sense anything out of the ordinary. He only felt a chill run down his spine, and he couldn't help but shiver. Inside the secret chamber, the strange man's field of vision became wider after he stood up. He could see every corner of the secret chamber clearly. Finally, the strange man's eyes stopped on the pterosaur that was huddled in the corner. The pupils in those crimson eyes seemed to have widened as they stared straight at the pterosaur. The pterosaur's entire body was trembling. It had already sensed extreme danger. It also wanted to quickly dodge, but when that pair of eyes looked over, it felt as if a mountain was pressing down on it, making it difficult for it to move. Even the movement of moving its wings was difficult. As the strange man got closer, the pressure became more and more obvious. It was as if the pressure on its body was increasing. It could still move its wings earlier, but when the man walked in front of it, it felt as if it was frozen again. It could only tremble in despair. The man walked in front of the pterosaur, bent down, and stretched out his hand towards the pterosaur. No matter how hard the pterosaur shook its wings, it couldn't avoid being caught by this hand. Its folded wings and body were gripped by this large hand, and then it was lifted into the air. It wanted to struggle, but it couldn't loosen its grip at all. The skin and flesh of the shriveled fingers were pressed tightly against the bones, but the strength was immense. The pterosaur, who had already gained a lot of weight, felt as if it was going to vomit out the food it had just eaten. It felt the threat of death. In a moment of desperation, it broke free from the restraints of the strong pressure. No longer frozen, it bit down on the hand that was strangling it. The sharp teeth that could bite the piranhas in the flaming river into a bloody mess only left a shallow mark on this greenish-black hand. Perhaps the skin was broken, perhaps it wasn't. The dry and hard flesh had changed slightly compared to before, but it wasn't much. It was still very different from a normal person's skin. However, after being bitten by the pterosaur, this strange man didn't have any wounds on his hand. There was no blood. Other than the teeth marks, there was nothing else. It was as if the pterosaur hadn't bitten a human hand, but an abnormally hard piece of wood. The pterosaur panicked. This person's skin was very hard. That was fine, at least it could bite down. However, when its sharp teeth bit down, it felt as if it had touched a hard metal object. It couldn't go any deeper. Sensing that death was approaching, the pterosaur hurriedly bit down. Suddenly, a series of knocking sounds could be heard in the secret room. That was the sound of its teeth hitting the bones of the other party. However, the other party didn't seem to feel anything. He retracted his hand that was strangling the pterosaur, looked at it, and was about to put it into his mouth. Seeing that it was about to be eaten, the pterosaur finally screamed. It was very noisy. The skin on the strange man's brow bone was squeezed towards the middle. This was because his face was stiff. If it was a normal person, their brows would be tightly furrowed. He raised his other hand, planning to break the neck of the present in front of him first. Screech! The secret room's stone door opened. The commotion at the door made the strange man stop. He opened his mouth but didn't bite the pterosaur in his hand. Instead, he twisted his neck to look at the door. Xiao Xian stood at the door. Behind him were Zheng Luo and the Yinjiao warrior who had been guarding here earlier. Xiao Xian had been talking to Gongjiren about crafting crystal gold when he suddenly sensed movement in the secret room. He immediately left Gongjiren behind and rushed over here. Zheng Luo also realized that something might have happened to the strange man downstairs, so he followed him. When he saw the scene in the secret room, Zheng Luo couldn't help but suck in a deep breath. The person he thought had been dead for a long time was standing there, looking like he was going to eat the pterosaur raw. When the strange man heard the commotion and looked over, Zheng Luo felt like he was looking at the most ferocious beast in the forest. The air seemed to be dyed with an invisible stench of blood. The flaming horn warrior who was guarding the door gulped. He heard the commotion and wanted to open the stone door himself. Fortunately, the Grand Elder was here. Otherwise, he would have to face this person alone. This person looked very difficult to deal with. This should be considered a human, right? Zheng Luo wanted to ask Xiao Xian if this was one of the strange men in the desert, but he quickly realized that this was different. Even if he had never seen a strange man in the desert, he had heard from others that those strange men had no consciousness of their own and were completely controlled by others. However, this strange man not far away clearly had his own consciousness. When he wasn't being controlled, he moved on his own and even knew how to hunt. When the pterosaur saw Xiao Xian, it was as if it had seen the light in the darkness. Its cries became louder and more urgent. Xiao Xian glanced at the pterosaur, then observed the shriveled, greenish-black monster. There was no breath, no heartbeat, but he moved like a living person. Moreover, Xiao Xian could clearly feel the energy waves from this strange man. The energy that existed in this strange man's body was the energy that Xiao Xian had injected into his body when he tried to control him. Everything was the same as the last time he controlled the enslavement. The only difference was the amount of energy used. However, the result was different. The biggest reason was probably because of the test subject. This man was strange. Jing Luo took a step forward. The strange man's eyes became more alert and hostile. The red in his eyes deepened, as if a bloody battle was about to break out. Jing Luo's eyes asked Xiao Xian if he should make a move. Xiao Xian shook his head slightly. He gestured with his hand, indicating that he should test the waters first. Xiao Xian couldn't control this strange man like he did with the pterosaur. They didn't know anything about this strange man's temper or strength. If they made a move now, what if the strange man got agitated and strangled the pterosaur to death? Xiao Xian still had a use for it. Put it down, Xiao Xian said. When the strange man looked at Xiao Xian, the wariness in his eyes lessened. He was much calmer. However, he didn't seem to understand Xiao Xian's words. His eyes were filled with confusion. If it wasn't for his dry skin, his expression would be much more expressive. Xiao Xian looked at the strange man strangling the pterosaur, then met the strange man's eyes. He raised his hand and gestured for him to let go. He tried his best not to show any killing intent. He couldn't treat this strange man the same way he treated puppets without self-awareness. He chose to treat him the same way he treated other tribesmen. He wanted to negotiate. If negotiation didn't work, then he could only use brute force. The tribe wouldn't allow an uncontrollable threat to exist. As if understanding Xiao Xian's intentions, the strange man let go of the pterosaur. The freed pterosaur scrambled towards Xiao Xian. It was so nervous that it couldn't fly. It scuttled behind Xiao Xian and stared at the strange man in the secret room. The strange man made some sounds. Perhaps it was because his vocal cords were damaged or because of other reasons, but the strange man's words sounded like meaningless syllables. However, there was no murderous intent in his eyes. Instead, he seemed a little anxious. Of course, this was only for Xiao Xian. When he looked at Jing Luo and the Yanjiao warrior, his red eyes were filled with wariness and an oppressive aura. "Is he hungry?" asked Jing Luo. When Xiao Xian opened the stone door, they saw the strange man already opening his cracked mouth at the pterosaur. He looked like he was about to eat it raw. Moreover, if a beast in the forest hadn't eaten for a long time, the first thing it would do after waking up would be to hunt for food. Xiao Xian thought so too. When the pterosaur first woke up, it also ate a huge meal. Although he couldn't tell if the strange man was alive or dead, if he could eat the pterosaur, then he should be able to eat other animals. He turned his head and said a few words to the Yanjiao warrior who had been staring blankly inside. The warrior nodded and quickly left. The strange man was still making ka-ka-ah-ah-ah sounds at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian couldn't understand what he was saying at all. He seemed to be having a hard time speaking too. The more he spoke, the more anxious he became. After taking a few steps towards the door, Jing Luo's entire body tensed up. His hand went to the hilt of his sword at his waist. Xiao Xian was also on guard, but he didn't feel any murderous intent from the strange man. That was why he didn't make a move. The strange man's movements were stiff. It was probably because he had been lying down for a long time. The warrior who had left quickly returned. He was carrying a freshly chopped beast leg. The blood was still dripping from the leg as he carried it over. Other than the beast leg, he also brought a plate of freshly cut cooked meat. The beast leg was brought over by Duo Kong. It was the leg of a large fearsome beast that had been hunted in the forest. When the Yanjiao warrior carried the beast leg over, it almost blocked the staircase. He had no choice. When he went to the butchering area, he saw the beast leg being cut off. Because he was in a hurry, he didn't think about anything else and just carried it over. After all, the great elder wanted it, so he carried a large one. When Xiao Xian saw the large beast leg, he realized that he didn't make it clear. There was no need to bring such a large beast leg over. But since it was brought over, there was no need to say anything more. When Xiao Xian took the two items, he exchanged glances with the warrior. The warrior nodded. Xiao Xian knew that he had done what he said. He didn't just send the warrior out to take these things. He also told him to briefly explain the situation downstairs to Duo Kong. Duo Kong was now standing guard upstairs with his men. They didn't come down directly. That would make the atmosphere even worse. They were guarding the staircase exit. If the situation here was out of Xiao Xian and Zheng Luo's control, the people upstairs could quickly come down to help. They could also block the exit. However, the strange man didn't seem to want to run out. When he saw the fearsome beast, his eyes were glued to the food. Not the plate of cooked meat, but the beast leg that was still dripping with blood. Xiao Xian handed the plate of cooked meat to the warrior next to him. He held the beast leg with one hand and handed it to the strange man. His other hand hung down and rested on the hilt of his sword. The strange man didn't notice Xiao Xian's movements. He only stared at the beast leg that Xiao Xian handed over. He slowly walked over and reached out to take the beast leg. When he looked at Xiao Xian, his face twitched. Perhaps he was smiling, but this smile was too creepy. His entire stiff face cracked. When he saw the strange man holding the beast leg, Xiao Xian and the other two's hearts skipped a beat. This strange man was very strong. Fearsome beast meat and bones were much heavier than normal beasts. Normally, only Yanjiao people could easily carry such a large beast leg while running. However, the strange man held the beast leg just as easily. His arms were steady and his body didn't sway. Instead, he seemed to be studying the beast leg, turning it up and down to examine it. After looking at it, the strange man opened his mouth and bit down. Like a wild beast in the forest, he used brute force to rip the meat off. Blood splattered out, but the strange man didn't care. He continued to eat. After a few bites, he chewed casually and swallowed. Yanjiao people would eat raw food in the forest when it wasn't convenient to light a fire. However, this man was different. He looked even more barbaric. It was so quiet that only the sound of meat crunching could be heard. After eating for a while, the strange man looked at Zheng Luo and the Yanjiao soldiers behind him. Zheng Luo understood that look. It was the look of a wild beast protecting its food. If Zheng Luo took one step closer, they would immediately fight. The strange man's dry face was now covered in blood. When he looked at this face, the hairs on the back of Zheng Luo's neck stood on end. Crack, crack, crack. The strange sound rang again. This time, it came from all over the strange man's body. The dry and hard flesh on his body began to swell as if it had absorbed water. His biting and gnawing movements gradually became smoother. Suddenly, the strange man stopped biting the beast leg. He held the beast leg tightly with one hand and clutched his abdomen with the other, as if he was puzzled by something. Just as Xiao Xian and the others were wondering what was going on, the strange man lowered his head and vomited. To Xiao Xian's surprise, the strange man had indeed vomited beast meat. However, it looked like it had been dried in the sun. It was slightly white. Most of the blood and water had been sucked out. This was all that was left. When the bloody meat went into the man's stomach, what came out was dried white meat. The severely dehydrated meat had shrunk a lot. However, it seemed like the strange man had vomited everything he ate, except for blood and water. Xiao Xian guessed that the strange man had been in this mummified state for too long. His digestive organs had changed. He could still use them, but they were different from normal people. His heart was still there. It was even functioning, but it wasn't beating. How strange. Xiao Xian had never heard of a tribe like this. Where did the people from Rock Hill City find these people? After vomiting, the strange man stood there and stared at the thing he had vomited. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while, he continued to bite and eat. Just like that, he ate and vomited. Gradually, the huge beast leg was reduced to 2/3, half, 1/3, and finally, only bones were left. Xiao Xian and the others were speechless. Holy shit, this was the first time they had seen someone who could eat more than the Yanjiao people. The strange man looked at the remaining leg bone in his hand. Then he grabbed the beast leg bone with both hands. Because the leg bone was too thick, he couldn't grab it with his hands. Even so, the man held it firmly. With a cracking sound, the thick leg bone of the ferocious beast was broken. Xiao Xian's eyelids twitched. This man had actually broken the beast leg bone like it was a sugar cane. Although the beast's bone was not one of the toughest beasts, it was still much tougher than other beasts. Although the flaming horns could also break a beast's bone, they couldn't do it as easily as this strange man. Zheng Luo and the other Yinjiao warrior weren't as calm as Xiao Xian. Their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. This. The Yinjiao people used to be called barbaric by other tribes, but this strange man in the secret room was much more barbaric than the Yinjiao people. After breaking the beast leg bone, the strange man began to suck on the bone marrow. If he wasn't satisfied with the fracture, he would break it again, or use two beast leg bones to knock against each other. The series of actions of breaking bones and extracting marrow seemed to be an instinct of his body. Everything was done very skillfully. Thinking back to his appearance and the accessories he wore, Xiao Xian had a guess. This was an ancient person who had lived for an unknown period of time. Chapter 757. They watched in shock as the strange man scraped all the flesh off the bones and sucked all the marrow out of the bones. This strange man had changed a lot compared to when Xiao Xian brought him here. The most obvious change was that he no longer looked like dried meat. He now had the flesh of a normal person, but he still didn't look strong. He didn't have any obvious bulging muscles, but after seeing how he broke a fearsome beast's leg bone, Xiao Xian and the others didn't dare underestimate him. His skin no longer looked greenish-black. It was still pale and bloodless, but it was different from EC's half-beast slave. At least that was what the half-beast slave looked like. But this strange man gave off a strange feeling. He looked like he was seriously ill, but also very dangerous. After eating, the strange man's skin softened a lot. Other than some dried cracks and the strange greenish-white color, he looked like a normal person. At least he didn't look like a corpse anymore. His movements were no longer stiff. If he could breathe and have a heartbeat, he would look more like a living person. After eating, the strange man looked at Xiao Xian with gratitude. He wasn't as wary of Zheng Luo and the Yinjiao warrior anymore. This place? It was probably because his body had begun to recover after eating that his voice no longer sounded like he was grinding a stone with sandpaper. However, his speech was still not smooth and his tone sounded very strange, but at least one could roughly guess what he was saying. This is the Yinjiao tribe, Xiao Xian said. Yinjiao? Tribe? The strange man's face was full of confusion. He seemed to remember something but couldn't. Who are you? Which tribe are you from? Xiao Xian asked. In order to make sure the strange man heard clearly, Xiao Xian said each word slowly. Who am I? The strange man looked even more confused. He didn't know what to say. He tilted his head and thought hard. Then do you remember your tribe's totem? Can you draw a totem? Xiao Xian asked. Totem? Totem? The strange man repeated the word in a low voice. The more he said it, the more fluent he became. He suddenly raised his head, and his crimson eyes flashed. Totem. Yes, totem. Do you remember? Xiao Xian walked into the secret room and took out some paint from a wooden cabinet. He mixed it with water, dipped his finger in it, and then drew a line on a piece of cloth. A black mark immediately appeared on the grayish-yellow linen cloth. Xiao Xian originally wanted to use a pen, but after seeing the strange man's condition, he decided that it would be more convenient. The strange man looked at Xiao Xian's actions, as if he was familiar with Xiao Xian's actions. He poked the small stone box with his right thumb. Many tribesmen like to paint with their thumbs. It was an ancient habit, and the strange man was no exception. Because he didn't control his strength, he almost knocked over the small stone box. Luckily, Xiao Xian held onto it. Looking at the black lump on his finger, the strange man walked to the stone table and drew a line on the linen cloth Xiao Xian had spread out. He felt that it was too troublesome, so he pushed the linen cloth aside and drew directly on the stone table. In the beginning, he paused every time his finger moved, as if he was recalling something. Towards the end, his drawing became smoother and smoother, and in the end, he didn't stop at all. It wasn't a complicated picture. If it was Xiao Xian, he could finish it in 2 seconds. However, this weirdo took nearly 10 minutes. Most of his time was spent thinking, so he wasn't fast when he drew. But at least he finished it. Zheng Luo couldn't help but walk over curiously. He craned his neck to look at the stone table. He couldn't get too close as the strange man was still guarded against him. This is? Zheng Luo looked at the words on the stone table and asked. The strange man looked at Zheng Luo cautiously and made a sound. but the tone was a little strange. Xiao Xian couldn't understand what he meant. The pattern on the stone table looked like a person with his arms raised, looking up. Above the person pattern was a circle. Usually, when a pattern like this appeared in a pattern, it was most likely referring to the sun. This was the strange man's tribal totem. Even if tribesmen couldn't remember their names, they wouldn't forget their tribe's totem, especially those tribes that still maintained their primitive fire seed. This strange man didn't seem to remember anything else, but he really drew this. After he finished, he stared at the totem on the stone table in a daze. Xiao Xian was sure that he had never seen a totem like this before, so he couldn't figure out who this person was. He looked at Jing Luo behind him, who was also confused. He had never seen a totem like this before, but if it was drawn by someone who even forgot his own name but still remembered the totem, the chances of it being fake were very low. But tribes had always existed. Some tribes might have gone extinct in the past, and this strange man was one of them. Your tribe used to be in the desert? Xiao Xian asked again. Desert? The strange man was even more unfamiliar with this word. He didn't understand what Xiao Xian was talking about. Realizing this, Xiao Xian explained the desert environment. It rarely rains, there aren't many trees, and it's all yellow sand. After he understood, the strange man nodded. It's there. The strange man knew that Xiao Xian wasn't from the same tribe as him, but because Xiao Xian's aura was similar to his own, he initially thought that Xiao Xian was from the same tribe as him. After eating a beast leg, his body was recovering and his senses were much stronger. Only then did he realize that Xiao Xian was different from himself. But he still didn't guard against Xiao Xian. Even if they weren't from the same tribe, it definitely had something to do with his awakening. So the strange man asked anxiously, "My tribe, go back." Xiao Xian only understood a few of the strange man's words. "You want to go back?" The strange man nodded. "But there are no more tribes in the desert," Xiao Xian said. The strange man was stunned. He shook his head and denied, "No, impossible." But then he thought of something as if he couldn't remember clearly. His face twisted, and he suddenly hugged his head and squatted down. He looked like he was in great pain. His greenish-white skin bulged like veins, and he roared like a wild beast in the forest. It sounded like a strong wind blowing into a cave and then out again. It was very strange. The stone chips and dust on the surrounding walls were shaken up, and the jar of water in the corner cracked with a bang. There wasn't much water in the jar, so it was mostly broken pieces that clanked against the wall. The sound echoed in the corridor outside. Duo Kong and the others who were blocking the staircase felt their hair stand on end. The soundproofing in the Flaming River Castle was quite good, but at this moment, the sound could be heard everywhere in the castle. The people who were close to the Flaming River Castle heard the sound very muffled, but they couldn't help but shiver. It was as if a cold wind swept past their backs. Where EC was, the half-beast slave grasshopper's spine sprouted spikes. He looked nervously in the direction of the Flaming River Castle. EC also felt strange. What's going on over there? Inside the Flaming River Castle, the people who heard the sound rushed over and saw Duo Kong and his men blocking the entrance. "Boss, is this sound made by a human?" someone asked Duo Kong. "How would I know?" Duo Kong was worried. What was going on down there? This was really making him anxious. In the secret room below, seeing the strange man become agitated, Xiao Xian and Jing Luo's hearts tightened. Their hands gripped the hilts of their swords. If this strange man suddenly went berserk, they would have no choice but to kill him here. Although he really wanted to get some information from this person, he had to prioritize the safety of his own people over everything else. However, the strange man only hugged his head and squatted on the ground. He looked like he was in great pain, and after a while, his voice gradually weakened until it stopped. Xiao Xian waited for a while, but he didn't move. "Hey, what's going on with you?" Xiao Xian asked. Without waiting for an answer, Xiao Xian asked again. Still, there was no response. He could feel that this man's violent aura had calmed down. If they didn't see him squatting there, no one would think there was anyone here. After all, there was no breathing or heartbeat. Other than the obvious signs of breathing before the roar, this man didn't seem to need air at all. If they locked him up in a sealed place, he might be able to survive. Xiao Xian walked over. With one hand holding his sword, he reached out with the other and pushed the squatting man. The squatting man immediately fell backwards. When he fell, he was still squatting with his hands on his head. His hands and legs seemed to be frozen. They didn't move at all. Zheng Luo wanted to ask if this man was dead, but he remembered that this man was different from the rest. He asked, "What's wrong with him?" Xiao Xian shook his head. From the energy waves around this man and in his body, it was very similar to other people when they were asleep. He's probably asleep? Xiao Xian guessed. Asleep? Zheng Luo looked at the strange man who was squatting with his hands on his head. He looked like he wanted to curl himself into an egg. He thought to himself, he's really different. He even sleeps like this. Xiao Xian looked at the pattern the strange man had drawn on the stone table. He gave Zheng Luo a look and the two walked out of the secret room with light steps. He looks like a normal person when they're asleep. He probably won't wake up anytime soon. You and Duo Kong stay here. I'm going to the Rain Tribe, Xiao Xian said in a low voice. The Rain Tribe? You want to ask about this man? Zheng Luo knew that the Rain Tribe used to live at the edge of the desert. He understood Xiao Xian's plan now. Yes, I want to know where this man came from. The people of Rock Hill City must have a purpose for keeping him here. This man said his tribe was in the desert. But we all know that ever since the slave masters came to the desert, there have been no more tribes in the desert. The Rain Tribe is so close to the desert and has been around for a long time. Maybe they know something that others don't. Zheng Luo nodded. Okay, come back quickly. If this man wakes up, he won't go easy on us. If there's no other choice, we'll have to kill him. Xiao Xian knew that this man treated him differently from the others. It was because Xiao Xian used another kind of energy to revive this man. In other words, this man wasn't really dead. He was just in a different state. It was Xiao Xian's energy that woke him up. Without saying anything else, Xiao Xian immediately left the Flaming River Castle and went to the Rain Tribe. When Xiao Xian arrived, Yang Sui was smiling as he looked at a piece of linen cloth in his hand. On it was written the plants they planted this year, their handicrafts, and the trading situation in the Flaming River Castle. Now that they had a firm foothold here, they didn't need to worry about starvation anymore. The Flaming River trading point gave them more options for survival. Textiles, pottery, knitted goods, and so on could be traded. Even if the harvest wasn't good, they wouldn't starve. When the Yanjiao needed labor, their tribe would rush to do it. After all, they could trade labor for food from the Yanjiao. As he was reading, someone came to report that the Yanjiao's Grand Elder, Xiao Xian, was here. Yang Sui immediately put down the things in his hand and asked someone to invite Xiao Xian in. They didn't dare to put on airs. They had to rely on the Yanjiao tribe to survive here. Otherwise, with their tribe's fighting strength, they wouldn't be able to fend off so many people and beasts. Grand Elder, what brings you to our Rain Tribe today? Yang Sui asked with a smile. Xiao Xian didn't beat around the bush. He handed over a piece of animal skin and asked, "Do you recognize this?" Xiao Xian had drawn the pattern on the animal skin. "What is this?" Yang Sui took the animal skin and opened it. The smile on his face froze and his expression changed. His gaze was as sharp as a knife as he stared at Xiao Xian. He asked in a low voice, "Where did you know this?" "You've seen it before?" Xiao Xian briefly told him about the strange man. Xiao Xian didn't explain how he brought the man back to life. He only said that the man who looked like an ancient corpse was brought back to life. Yang Sui's fingers tightened around the animal skin. His hands were trembling and his face was pale. Did they come back? They actually came back. Yang Sui muttered. His eyes were filled with fear and uneasiness. It was as if he had fallen into an ice cave. Even his blood was frozen. Who the hell are they? Seeing Yang Sui's soulless expression, Xiao Xian continued, he can't remember anything for the time being. He only remembers this pattern. Moreover, they should be controlled by the people of Rock Hill City and kept as puppets. Xiao Xian's words made Yang Sui breathe a sigh of relief, but his fingers were still trembling and his face was pale. The Han tribe, it's the Han tribe. The Han tribe? Xiao Xian had never heard of this tribe. The Han tribe used to live in the desert? Xiao Xian asked. Yang Sui's mouth twitched as if he was about to laugh. No, they didn't live in the desert. They lived in the desert wherever the Han tribe was. Xiao Xian was stunned by his words. You mean the existence of the desert is because of the Han tribe? You can say that. Yang Sui took a deep breath and tried to suppress his emotions. That strange man should be very strong. His tribe must not have been weak in the past. But how could such a tribe disappear in the desert? Xiao Xian was puzzled. If they weren't strong, they wouldn't have been targeted by Rock Hill City. Yang Sui smiled bitterly. You only know that the Han tribe is strong, but you don't know that the Rain tribe used to be a big tribe too. Just in case, Yang Sui went out and drove the people around the house away. After he entered the house, he drank a bowl of water to calm himself down. He continued, there are some things that I found out from my ancestors' notes after I became a shaman. My ancestor had some written notes that the Rain tribe's chief and shaman knew, but there were some secret notes that only the Rain tribe's shaman could open. Not every shaman could open them. Without the strength to open them, you wouldn't be able to see them. And from those notes, I solved the puzzle that had been puzzling me for a long time. Xiao Xian once told Yang Sui that the primitive fire seed would weaken. Although it wasn't obvious, they could see the difference if they compared it with the fire seed from thousands of years ago. However, few people could live that long. They were different from the beasts that could grow indefinitely. People with different strength had a limit to their lifespan. Most senior totem warriors could live up to 200 or 300 years. Yang Sui could accept that the Rain tribe's fire seed was weakening, so they couldn't pray for rain. But he didn't understand why the Rain tribe's fire seed was weakening so quickly. The Rain tribe wasn't the only tribe with a long history. Yinjiao was also an ancient tribe, but they weren't as weak as the Rain tribe. In the end, it was all because of the fire seed. If the fire seed was strong, the tribe would be strong. If the fire seed was weak, the tribe would be weak. The Rain tribe had been living on the edge of the desert for so long that they had already broken away from the middle-sized tribes. Perhaps in the eyes of many people, they would soon disappear from this world. The fire seed? Yang Sui raised his head and sighed. Because of the Han tribe, the Rain tribe's fire seed is weaker than others. Have you fought with the Han tribe before? Xiao Xian asked. A long time ago we fought with them. In the end we lost. Yang Sui told Xiao Xian what he had recorded in his ancestors' secret notes. The desert wasn't like this in the past. It wasn't much different from other places on the mainland. Although it didn't rain often and some places were even dry all year round, it wasn't as big as the desert today. The Han tribe lived in a place that was dry all year round, while the Rain tribe lived in another place with fertile soil. It was very suitable for growing a plant that was discovered by the ancestors of the Rain tribe. After crushing the fruit of the plant and baking it with water, you would get a hard biscuit. The biscuit was easy to store and was also good at suppressing hunger. At that time, the Rain tribe valued that piece of land very much and even wanted to expand it. In order to make the crops grow better, the Rain tribe prayed for rain more often. Naturally, the range of rainfall extended towards the expansion of the farmland. However, the Han tribesmen didn't like rain. They didn't even like water. They could survive in dry environments for a long time because they liked drought. Just like the cacti in the desert, they themselves were reservoirs. As long as their reservoirs were filled with water, they could live well even if they didn't drink a single drop of water for 100 days. The Han tribe also wanted to expand their territory and have more dry land. As a result, even if the two tribes didn't live close to each other, they still had conflicts because of the expansion of their territories. Later on, the conflict intensified and the two tribes went to war. Tribesmen could fight to the death for territory, so the two tribes had completely different preferences and wanted to drive each other away or destroy each other directly. The conflict lasted for a long time. Yang Sui didn't know how long it lasted. There was no record of this in his ancestors' notes. It only mentioned that in the end, the shamans of the two tribes fought each other and both used the power of their fire seed. According to the ancient records left by the Rain tribe's ancestors, during the war between the two shamans, the wind and rain changed with just a wave of their hands. In the end, the Rain tribe was defeated. At that time, the shaman of the Rain tribe took the fire seed and the remaining tribesmen and left the place where they lived. They settled in another place, which was the edge of the desert. Because of that war, the Rain tribe's fire seed was severely depleted. It was an almost irreversible loss. At that time, the shaman of the Rain tribe blamed himself and burned himself in the fire pit. Since then, as time passed, the Rain tribe's fire seed continued to weaken, just like the other tribes' fire seeds. However, because of the war, their fire seed weakened faster than other tribes' fire seeds. When Yang Sui first learned the truth, his heart was filled with bitterness. However, at that time, he didn't know that the Han tribe still existed in the world. Although the desert had expanded to the Rain tribe's territory, the Han tribe seemed to have disappeared from the world. Perhaps because of some natural disasters or other reasons, the Han tribe no longer appeared. When the slave masters from the other side of the sea occupied the desert, the Han tribe became completely unknown. Yang Sui's people felt that in the end, the Rain tribe survived. It was a victory for them to be alive. As for the cruel history and defeat of the Rain tribe, the ancestors of the Rain tribe didn't want anyone to know about it. Yang Sui also kept it a secret. In the entire Rain tribe, except for him, no one else knew about this history. Listening to Yang Sui's story, Xiao Xian felt that it was unbelievable. So the desert was created by the war between these two tribes. Out of the two veteran powerhouses with a long history, one was defeated and had to retreat to a faraway place. The fire company had lost too much of its resources in that war, so much so that it was much weaker than the other tribes of the same period. They couldn't even pray for rain. The other one disappeared for unknown reasons. Xiao Xian remembered that the strange man looked like an ancient corpse. He should have been in that state for a long time, but he didn't know if their disappearance had anything to do with the slave masters. However, Yang Sui didn't know. If Xiao Xian wanted to know the reason, he could only ask the strange man. Of course, the strange man had to remember. Chapter 758. When Xiao Xian returned to Yanjiao, he relayed the information he got from Yang Sui to the leaders of the tribe. Yang Sui's request was not to air their dirty linen in public. Even the Rain ancestors did not plan to let the Rain tribesmen know. Xiao Xian could not let too many Yanjiao know either. That was why he only told the leaders. Regarding the monster, everyone agreed to wait and see if they should kill him. They wanted to learn more about the unknown from him, especially the two retired shamans. When the pterosaur was resurrected, they wanted to use this strange bird-like creature to deduce what happened to the fire seed a long, long time ago. Unfortunately, the pterosaur could not speak. Even if it was smarter than some beasts, it could not compare to humans. It could not compare to Caesar and Cha-Cha, who grew up in human tribes. The two retired shamans were destined to not get the information they wanted. However, this time was different. No one knew how long the Han tribe had existed. There were no records of this tribe in the Flaming Horn ancestors' handwritten notes. Perhaps it was too long ago. Even if there were records of this tribe, they would have been lost over time. For example, during the cataclysm 1,000 years ago, although some history was recovered, it wasn't absolutely complete. It would be great if he could learn more about that era from that monster. After all, memories could be recovered and humans could speak. This was different from the pterosaur. Of course, this was all based on the assumption that the monster was no threat to Yanjiao. Otherwise, they would have to kill him. The monster fell asleep in a squatting position with his hands on his head. He did not wake up. Xiao Xian could not stay here forever. The 6 Gongjia family members were still waiting for him. Zheng Luo did not want to delay his metal work either. Duo Kong had led a hunting team not long ago, so they did not need to go out for a while. Hence, Zheng Luo and Duo Kong took turns to guard the secret room. They had to guard it personally. They would not be at ease if it were anyone else. After 5 days, the strange man in the secret chamber finally opened his eyes. Zheng Luo felt strange watching over such a silent person. This was the first time he knew such a person existed. When Zheng Luo heard the commotion, he stood at the entrance of the secret chamber and peeked in carefully. There was a long wooden box on the floor. It was newly made. Next to it was the coffin-like wooden box used to store the monster in the desert. Because it was damaged, Xiao Xian made a new one and placed the sleeping monster in it. Zheng Luo didn't know why Xiao Xian would have such thoughts. Actually, Xiao Xian had only looked at the strange man and suddenly thought of zombies. When Zheng Luo looked inside, the curled-up person in the wooden box had already straightened his hands and feet. He was no longer in a stiff posture. However, when he moved, there were still some creaking sounds, as if his bones and muscles were being pulled. However, this time, the strange man was unexpectedly quiet. He should have known there was someone outside, but he did not care. After he sat up, he was silent. No one knew what he was thinking. When Xiao Xian received the news and came over, the strange man was still sitting up straight like he had just woken up. "How is it?" Xiao Xian asked Zheng Luo. "It's been like that for a long time. Not moving at all." Normal people would make some movements, including blinking. However, when the person inside didn't move, he really didn't move. His eyelids didn't even move. It was as if his entire body was frozen. His chest didn't rise and fall, and he couldn't hear his heartbeat. Even his pulse couldn't be seen. Xiao Xian was puzzled. Why was this person so quiet? Zheng Luo saw that Xiao Xian was still holding a fine-necked ceramic bottle. He sniffed it. It smelled of blood. He understood. When Xiao Xian entered, the person who had been standing there stiffly raised his head to look at Xiao Xian. He wasn't sure if it was because he sensed Xiao Xian's arrival or because he smelled blood. "You're awake? Do you want a drink?" Xiao Xian handed over the fine-necked ceramic bottle. It was fresh, fearsome beast blood he had obtained from the slaughterhouse. Even though this person did not seem to have any intention of attacking, Xiao Xian still remained vigilant. The strange man looked at Xiao Xian, but his expression did not change. He took the bottle from Xiao Xian's hand and stared at it. He did not control his strength well, and there was a cracking sound. There was a fist-sized hole in the bottle, and the crack was still expanding. Blood flowed out from the hole. The strange man quickly used one hand to block the hole, and the other hand was gentle. He probably did not expect the bottle to be so fragile. After looking at it, the strange man removed the stopper with his mouth and sniffed with his nose. It was only at times like this that he showed obvious signs of breathing. Without hesitation, he grabbed the bottle and poured it into his mouth. Only the sound of swallowing could be heard in the secret room. For people with limited strength, drinking too much ferocious beast blood would be unbearable for their bodies. Just like when Xiao Xian was still a junior totem warrior, drinking a little bit of ferocious beast blood could replace a meal. However, this person directly ate the whole ferocious beast leg that day. Xiao Xian didn't know whether it was because of this reason that he slept for several days. This time, he was not in a hurry. He kept a steady pace and drank almost 4 liters of beast blood. "Thank you." Although his voice sounded a little strange, Xiao Xian still understood what he was saying. He raised his eyebrows. He saw how the man removed the stopper without making a sound just now. It was very smooth, as if he was very familiar with this process. "What did you remember?" Xiao Xian asked. "A lot." The man paused and continued, "My name is Gan Xie of the Han tribe." The man calmly told Xiao Xian about the Han tribe. It was similar to what Yang Sui had told him, but Gan Xie's explanation was more detailed. The people of the Han tribe liked drought. Similarly, they also liked the sun, which caused drought. That was why there was a circle in their totem. They could survive in a dry environment. On the contrary, they would not be able to adapt to places with plenty of rain. They would even fall sick. It sounded ridiculous that people with such strong physiques would fall sick in a wet environment, but it was true. The drought in the central area of the Han tribe was the most serious. The soil was desertified, especially near the fire pit. It could be said that the fire pit of the Han tribe was built on yellow sand. It was similar to the sand in the desert today. Because the trees were sparse in dry areas, even if the people of the Han tribe mastered the method of drilling wood to start a fire, they did not light it often. This made them develop the habit of eating raw meat, just like how Xiao Xian saw this man eating a beast leg. Gan Xie only showed obvious emotional fluctuations when he talked about the war between the Rain tribe and the Han tribe. His red eyes seemed to be flowing with blood. At that time, there were not many people from the Han tribe and the Rain tribe, only about 700 to 800 people. However, the people of the Han tribe were much stronger. They were also junior totemic warriors, but one of them could fight against 2 or more of the people of the Han tribe now. The key to a tribe's strength was not its population, but its overall strength. Of course, generally speaking, the stronger tribes had more people. However, at that time, 700 to 800 people was already considered a big tribe. Their population could not be compared to now. During the war, the Han tribe did seem to have the upper hand. The area of desertification expanded, and the Rain tribe left in the end. However, the Rain tribe did not know that although the Han tribe seemed to have won the war, they had paid a heavy price. Their fire seed had a problem. The people of the Han tribe fell one by one because of their fire seed. Their fire seed was also on the verge of collapse. At that time, the shaman of the Han tribe could not control it, so the desertification expanded. The larger the area of desertification, the more the fire seed was consumed. In the end, the shaman of the Han tribe made a decision out of regret. If this continued, the fire seed might disappear, and the Han tribe would disappear from this world. Therefore, the shaman of the Han tribe chose 10 people. Including the shaman himself, there were 11 people in total. They sacrificed themselves to stop the fire seed from being consumed. Unfortunately, we failed in the end. Our fire seed disappeared. Gan Xie's face was sad. Fortunately, he did not riot. Perhaps it was because the most painful moment had passed. Xiao Xian guessed as he continued to listen to Gan Xie's story. After that, the shaman of the Han tribe was seriously injured. There were only 11 people left in the Han tribe. They dug an underground cave and buried their dead tribesmen in it. After a few years, Gan Xie could not remember how many years had passed. The shaman of the Han tribe, who had lost his mind, could no longer hold on. Gan Xie and the other 10 people did not want to continue living. Their fire seed was gone, and their hearts were dead. What was the point of living? They followed the shaman into the underground cave. They wanted to die with him. Maybe they could still see their tribesmen after they died. Although Gan Xie's pronunciation was a little strange, he spoke slowly and fluently. Xiao Xian could understand what he meant. Gan Xie looked at his hands. If he could wake up, it meant that they were not truly dead. I have a question that I would like to ask. Seeing that Gan Xie had regained his senses and did not look like he was about to go crazy, Xiao Xian said, I found the power of the fire seed in your bones. This means that your fire seed did not disappear. It was absorbed into your bodies. Gan Xie looked up at Xiao Xian and asked anxiously, Really? Didn't you notice? This area is Yanjiao territory. Did you feel the fire seed? Xiao Xian asked. No fire seed. How could it not be? Gan Xie could no longer keep his calm. Now, more and more tribes are choosing to absorb the fire seed into their tribesmen's bodies. This is because the fire seed will weaken. If it is absorbed into the tribesman's blood, it can ensure that the fire seed will not continue to weaken naturally. It can also be passed down through the bloodline of the tribesman. Xiao Xian briefly explained the situation on the other side of the sea to Gan Xie and explained why everyone had chosen this path. So it's not that the fire seed is gone. Gan Xie looked sad, but he could not cry. In fact, he was not as emotional as Xiao Xian had imagined. Does this mean that the Han tribe can still exist? Gan Xie's eyes lit up with joy. However, Xiao Xian immediately poured cold water on him. I'm afraid you don't understand what happened in the desert. Do you know how you got here? Xiao Xian asked. Gan Xie looked at Xiao Xian and waited for Xiao Xian to continue. Ever since he woke up, he had an inexplicable feeling that Xiao Xian was trustworthy. He could not control this feeling. Perhaps it was due to the influence of Xiao Xian's power that had awakened him. Xiao Xian also briefly explained their trip to the desert. The Rain tribe and the Han tribe were mortal enemies. The war that year had caused both sides to suffer great losses. One of the powerful tribes was reduced to a small, unknown tribe and almost couldn't survive. The other tribes seemed to have won, but in reality, they lost even more and almost lost their entire tribe. However, Xiao Xian did not want to see them fight. so he could only direct their hatred to the desert. I'm guessing that the other 9 tribesmen of yours are not doing so well. Xiao Xian was not making wild guesses. The people of Rock Hill City could enslave the dead and turn them into puppets. From the looks of it, the Han tribesmen had already been dug out by the people of Rock Hill City and distributed to every ruler. However, due to the Han tribesmen's special physiques, they were not easy to enslave. Xiao Xian did not know how many Han tribesmen had already been turned into puppets. With every word Xiao Xian said, Gong Qia's murderous aura grew stronger. The air seemed to be filled with blood. This made Jing Luo, who was outside the secret room, tremble in fear. He was on guard in case the person inside suddenly attacked. If you don't believe me, I have an idea. However, I don't know how high the success rate is because I can't guarantee that it won't happen. How long? Gong Qia asked. If it took too long, he would immediately leave this place and head to the desert to investigate. Soon. Whether or not it will happen depends on these few days, Xiao Xian said. Gong Qia did not leave. He stayed in the secret room. He would do as Xiao Xian said and continue to wait here until the thing Xiao Xian said happened. Seeing Xiao Xian come out of the secret room, Jing Luo hurried forward and asked, "Did he really remember?" "Looks like it." Could it be that his head was not normal when he first woke up? Now that he's sleeping, it's back to normal? Jing Luo guessed. Then, he thought of what Xiao Xian said might happen. How should we arrange it? Send more people? No need. Just do what we usually do. It's not good to be too deliberate. That's true. Then what does he eat? Zheng Luo thought. Send someone to bring him a bottle of blood. He'll regain his senses. Also, he won't attack us before he knows what's going on. But just in case, let's be careful. If I'm free, I'll do it. Don't worry, just take care of that side. Zheng Luo pointed in the direction of Yan Jiao's headquarters. He still wanted to get his hands on a crystal weapon. I'll stay here. If the situation changes, I'll look for you. Xiao Xian talked to Zheng Luo and Duo Kong again. After making some arrangements, he left the trading point and went to the headquarters. They had already begun to forge the crystal weapons. Gongjia Ren and the others were not used to it yet, so Xiao Xian had to go over and keep an eye on them. 2 days later, at night, a black shadow ran along the empty trading point like a ghost in the night. He hid his aura very well. When he ran, he blended in with the sound of the wind. It was hard to detect him, at least not in the houses he passed. The black shadow approached the flaming river castle. Then he found a gap where the guards left and climbed up the stone wall like a gecko. "Hey, what are you doing there?" A few Yanjiao soldiers held water moonstones and asked the person squatting on the ground not far away. "My stomach hurts, so I didn't go with them to patrol." The person who stood up was dressed in the same style and accessories as the flaming river castle guards. His face was also one of the guards here. "Is it serious?" A person asked with concern. "It's not serious. I'll be fine after some rest." Not far away, a few flaming horn warriors laughed. "What did you eat? Or are you looking for an excuse to slack off? Don't get caught by Elder Zheng Luo." I know. The person standing by the wall waved his hand. "You guys should go patrol too. Don't slack off." "Hey, you're still talking about us." The Yanjiao soldiers laughed and left. After the Yanjiao soldiers left, the person leaning against the wall smiled. His face twitched from the pain and slowly turned into mockery. The Yanjiao guards were just SOSO. He snuck into the flaming river castle and hid in a dark corner. None of the patrolling guards could see him. No one would pass by at this time. He took out a round wooden box and twisted open the lid. There was a brownish-yellow worm the length of a fingernail inside. The person looked at the worm wriggling against the wall of the box. It stopped at a spot and knocked its head against the wall. Seeing this, the person closed the lid and snuck towards the direction the worm was pointing at. He avoided the Yanjiao soldiers on the way. He walked and stopped, looked at the direction the worm was pointing at, and found the approximate location of the entrance to the secret underground room. There were people moving around. The person waited for a while, then shook the hand behind his back. A thin piece like a cicada's wing popped out. It was shaped like the claws of a beast that had been flattened. He was about to kill the 2 Yanjiao soldiers guarding the entrance when he heard footsteps. He had no choice but to wait. "Hey, you two, the boss is calling for you," the person shouted at the people at the entrance. "What's the matter?" The two were confused. "I don't know. The boss said he has something to tell you. It should be about that strange person. Go and come back quickly." The three of them left as they spoke. The person hiding in the dark waited for the footsteps to fade away before coming out. With his rich experience, he could easily find the exact location of the entrance. He carefully pulled open the stone slab at the entrance. He was still cursing the Yinjiao soldiers for putting such a heavy slab here. After entering the secret underground room, there were no water moonstones around. There was no light, but there was no one around either. He didn't take out any light crystals and walked forward. He checked and confirmed that there was no one around. There wasn't even any breathing or heartbeat. He took out a small bead and the round box with the worm. He wanted to see which secret room it was. He walked to one of the stone doors and used some strength to pull it open. He cursed the Yinjiao soldiers again for using such heavy stone doors. Finally, he pulled open an opening. He cautiously sensed around. There was no one, no breathing, no heartbeat, and not even a pulse. But the target was here. Looking inside, it found a long wooden box on the ground. The lid of the wooden box was closed. Looking at the appearance of the wooden box, it was exactly as described by its employer. This was it. Chapter 759. Although his night vision wasn't the best in the organization, it wasn't bad either. After all, he could see more clearly when there was light. Since there was no one here, he didn't intend to let himself suffer. Moreover, for the sake of caution, he still needed to take a good look at the big wooden box to see if it was the one his employer had mentioned. He didn't want to make a mistake on this trip. The small round bead didn't shine as brightly as the water moonstone. It seemed to be covered by a light shield, making it more hidden. The light was different from different angles. At this time, most of the light was shining on the wooden box. He opened the lid of the wooden box and looked inside. He frowned. This was different from what his employer said. His employer said that Yinjiao had stolen a monster like the puppets in the desert. He had seen those puppets before, so he knew what his employer was talking about. But the one in front of him, although it looked a little strange compared to a normal person, it wasn't too different. Anyway, it didn't look like the puppets in the desert. It looked more like the Yinjiao had put a dead person here. Wasn't it? Was it the wrong one? How could it be? Feeling suspicious, he opened the round box again and looked at the worm inside. It stopped at this position. Could it be that it wasn't this secret room, but another secret room in this direction? As he lowered his head and thought, he suddenly felt a strong and cold murderous aura. It gave him goosebumps on his back and made his hair stand on end. He had been stealing for years, so of course he knew. Every time he had this feeling, he only had to do one thing: run. However, when he quickly put away the box and looked away, he found that the person he thought was a dead body lying inside had opened his eyes. The blood-red eyes were looking at him, and the expressionless face was moving. Not good. Seeing this, he thought that the Yinjiao had set up an ambush here and let someone pretend to be a dead body to lure him here. He cursed the Yinjiao in his heart. How cunning! Just as he was about to leave, he found that his left arm, which was leaning on the wooden box, was grabbed. It was like being grabbed by the claws of a fierce beast. Without hesitation, he shook his arm. Crack, 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 crack. A series of bone-cracking sounds could be heard. The arm that Gan Xie was grabbing was twisted in an instant. However, it wasn't broken by Gan Xie's grip. Instead, it was his own body that had changed. The bones in his arm became as slippery as a loach. They became thinner, curved, and slipped out of Gan Xie's hand. After leaving the other party's palm, although his arm once again formed the shape of a long arm bone amidst a series of cracking sounds, it was not without a price. Intense pain quickly spread from his arm to his brain, and his nerves felt as if they were being plucked one after another. Hissing sounds came from between his teeth. He didn't dare to shout loudly for fear of attracting more Yinjiao. He didn't have the time to wonder how this person could fool him by pretending to be dead, nor did he have the time to wonder if this was a deliberate arrangement by the Yinjiao people, or if this was just another secret the Yinjiao people were hiding. Right now, he just wanted to leave this place and make plans later. The person in the wooden box had already sat up. Seeing that he was about to chase after Gan Xie, the person twisted his waist, raised his knee, and swept his leg towards Gan Xie. He wanted to knock Gan Xie down again and buy him more time. In response to the person's kick, Gan Xie raised his arm to block it. Bang! When the leg and arm collided, Gan Xie only moved slightly. He didn't stop standing up. On the other hand, the person who had sneaked in felt a sharp pain in his calf. It was as if he hadn't kicked a person's arm, but a hard metal object. The person who had sneaked in felt even worse. To be able to get to where he was today, he definitely wasn't weak. In the past, when he fought with people, his leg was like a whip that could break people's bones. But now, not only did he fail to knock Gan Xie down, he almost broke his own leg with a kick. This was unbelievable. Retreat. In the face of such an opponent, he didn't want to fight anymore. He knew that his opponent was difficult to deal with, but he didn't care about Gan Xie. Hence, the person ignored Gan Xie and ran towards the stone door of the secret room. Like a gust of wind, he was about to slip out in the blink of an eye. Unfortunately, the moment he reached the stone door, the door, which was wide enough for two people, was closed with a bang. He ran too fast and didn't stop. The person who had sneaked in crashed into the stone door. The dust on the door was shaken off by the impact. Motherfucker Yinjiao people. If he still didn't know who was behind all this, he would really be an idiot. When he saw the person lying inside, he suspected that the Yinjiao people had already prepared for this. Now he was sure. He grabbed the dented part of the stone door and pulled, but it didn't move an inch. As he cursed, the man heard the approaching footsteps behind him. He couldn't care less about continuing to pull the door open. He lowered his body, swung his shoulders, and bent his arms. Without turning his head, he threw a series of elbow strikes, hitting the people behind him like a torrential rain. Bang, 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 bang. It was as if he had hit a hard rock instead of a human body. Gan Xie stared at the person in front of him without blinking. It was as if he wasn't the one who was hit. He took 2 small steps back and regained his balance. Then, he raised his leg and kicked the person behind the stone door. The strength of this kick was far greater than the previous one. The strong force landed on the person's abdomen and sent him crashing into the stone door. The sound of bones breaking could be heard in the air. The person who was kicked landed heavily on the ground with a muffled thud. He curled up and wailed in pain. Outside the door, Xiaoxian stood by the stone door. He held the door with both hands to prevent it from being opened. He was the one who closed the door just now. Duo Kong and Jing Luo, who had rushed over, heard the banging sounds and patted the dust off their bodies. Is that Han tribesman really all right? After all, this person could be one of the robbers. Jing Luo was worried. Not only were the robbers not caught, but Gan Xie, who had just been resurrected, was also killed. It's fine. It's just that Gan Xie has an advantage in here. Most bandits were known for their fast speed and ability to escape. However, if they were trapped in a small space, their escape skills would not be of much use. If they could maintain their stamina, it would be fine. However, if they could not hold on for long, they could only be beaten up. Plus, Gan Xie probably needs to vent, Xiaoxian said. He had been like a corpse for many years. It wasn't easy for him to wake up with external help, only to realize that everything he knew was wrong. Even if they tried to save him, it was too late. His tribe was gone and he had become like a ghost. His digestive system had changed and he couldn't eat many things anymore. The most convenient way was to drink blood. Who could bear to turn from a normal person into this? He had never been able to release his pent-up emotions. Perhaps this time, he could use the robbers to vent. Hearing Xiaoxian's words, Jing Luo and Duo Kong thought it was a good idea. After all, they were robbers. They would feel good if they could make the robbers suffer. Why wouldn't they? After thinking it through, Jing Luo and Duo Kong were no longer in a hurry. They sat outside and waited. Their ears perked up, listening to the sounds inside and guessing the situation. Inside the secret room, Gan Xie walked towards the intruder step by step. His footsteps weren't loud, but he maintained an even speed and strength. Tap, tap, tap. every sound sent chills down the intruder's spine. He felt the temperature in the secret room drop sharply. The intruder realized that the intruder wasn't panting. No heartbeat. Not even breathing. If it was a normal person, even if they could fool him by pretending to be dead, they would still be panting, their heartbeat would change, and their blood flow would change. He knew all these too well. In the past, he would use these to understand his opponent's true emotions. After all, facial expressions and actions could be deceiving. However, some of the characteristics of the body could reflect a person's true emotions. But now, all of these were useless. This person was really like a corpse. If it wasn't for the fact that he looked so different from the puppets in the desert, the intruder would have thought that this was what he was looking for. No, maybe, the intruder was shocked when he thought of this possibility. At this moment, Gan Xie was already in front of the man who was curled up on the ground. Suddenly, the man slid away from the stone door and away from Gan Xie like a loach. Then, with a sudden movement of his ankle, he spun up. His hands, which were originally hugging his abdomen, opened outwards. Dozens of sharpened small spindle-shaped blades flew out and drew different arcs in the air. Wherever the blades passed, the air seemed to be cut into pieces. With a series of whooshing sounds, the sharp blades pierced into various parts of Gan Xie's body. Instantly, Gan Xie's chest, back, shoulders, thighs, and even his neck and head were pierced by thin, spindle-shaped blades. However, the intruder's heart sank when he threw these blades out. Something was wrong. These hidden weapons that could easily pierce through animal skins and wooden planks seemed to have hit a harder rock. They couldn't go any further. Only a part of them was stuck in and the other part was exposed. Even if they couldn't penetrate deeply, they would still cause some damage. However, the person who was pierced like a hedgehog didn't seem to notice the injuries on his body. He didn't even make a sound and maintained his original appearance. He didn't even blink. Also, blood would flow out if he was pierced. However, he didn't smell any blood. It was as if this person didn't have any blood. How was this possible? While the intruder was still in shock, Gan Xie was like an agile monkey in the forest. He changed his slow pace and sped up, chasing after the intruder who was trying to escape. The intruder had the advantage in terms of speed. However, he was already injured and dodging consumed a lot of energy. After a while, his dodging speed slowed down. At this moment, an arm that was much thinner than the Yanjiao's arm smashed into his back. The force behind the blow sent him flying. His face slammed into the wall with a loud bang. His nose was broken and 2 of his teeth were broken. The smell of blood filled his mouth. Outside the door, Duo Kong shook his head when he heard the sound of something crashing into the wall. Why are the robbers so daring? They don't learn from their mistakes. Didn't robber 11, 12, 6, and 7 all suffer at the hands of the Yanjiao? How dare they come here? Could it be someone else? Duo Kong asked. No, it's very likely, Jing Luo said. No matter who it is, we'll find out soon. Xiao Xian listened to the commotion inside. It wouldn't last long. They would find out soon. What if Gan Xie kills him? Duo Kong asked. I don't think so. After all, he's the one who wants to know the truth the most, Xiao Xian said. In the secret chamber, the person who had been beaten to a pulp felt a mixture of physical pain and shock in his heart. He couldn't believe that what he had just experienced was real. However, he was the one who had been beaten, so he had no choice but to believe it. The person in front of him had no heartbeat or breath. It was as if he didn't even need to breathe. He was too similar to the strange puppets in the desert. Could it be that the Yanjiao had already gained control of another type of monster similar to the desert puppets? He knew about the puppets in the desert. In order to completely immobilize them, one had to break their bones bit by bit. The monster in front of him was probably the same. However, it was too difficult to do that to the person in front of him. His bones were too hard. He knew that he couldn't win against such a powerful puppet. If he continued, he would only be beaten to death. He had to escape. However, the stone door was tightly shut and he couldn't open it. He couldn't defeat the person inside either. He could only try his best to avoid the opponent's attacks and stall for time. Perhaps he could talk to the Yanjiao people? Just as that person was about to escape, a hand pressed down on his head, pushing him down as he was about to take a step forward. His legs knelt on the ground. His bones hit the stone floor with a loud thud. The man screamed in pain again. His fingers gripped the scimitar that looked like a beast's claws and slashed at the hand pressing down on his head. Poof, poof, poof. The sound of the weapon slashing against Gong Xie's arm was strange. It didn't sound like a normal person's arm. It didn't feel right either. When he slashed, the man purposely aimed for a few important blood vessels on Gong Xie's arm. However, just like before, there was no sound of blood spurting out. There wasn't even the smell of blood. Moreover, when the scimitar broke through Gong Xie's skin and touched his bones, it was as if it was blocked by a hard metal object. It couldn't go any further. The more he thought about it, the colder his heart became. The hand on his head didn't move an inch. In the darkness, the man could make out the general appearance of the person holding his head. He could also see that the other person's eyes were different from normal people's. Those eyes were cold and emotionless. No, the hand on his head didn't have any warmth either. A cold chill seeped into his limbs and bones. Every bone in his body seemed to be unable to withstand the chill and was trembling, especially when he felt the fingers on his head begin to tighten. He really could not hold it in any longer. He was afraid that if he was a step late, his head would not be complete. Don't kill me. I didn't want to come here. Someone asked me to come here. It's Sulu. It's Sulu, the second young master of Fallen Leaves City in Rock Hill City. In the face of the fear of death, the man's face contorted with pain became even more ferocious. It was as if he was throwing caution to the wind and yelling with all his might. He was afraid that the Yinjiao outside the secret chamber wouldn't be able to hear him. At this point, he no longer cared about the benefits that Sulu had promised him, although the thought of those benefits still made his heart ache. He wanted nothing more than to kill the Yinjiao who had set this trap. But now, he was the one who had lost. He could only admit defeat. At a time like this, if he didn't use Sulu as a shield, was he supposed to attract the hatred himself? After yelling, the man felt the hand on his head stop tightening. He relaxed and thought to himself, sure enough, it's more useful to use someone else as a shield. Perhaps he should have said more. That way, he could have negotiated with the Yinjiao to save his life. As for the Yinjiao and Sulu, let them fight it out. It would be best if both sides suffered great losses. The man lowered his head slightly and panted heavily. Every time he breathed, he felt immense pain in his body. His eyes flashed with ruthlessness as he looked at the stone door from the corner of his eyes. But in the next moment, the man, who had just heaved a sigh of relief, felt his body freeze again. Someone spoke, but the voice didn't come from outside the door. It came from above him. Who are you? And who is Sulu? The voice was a little strange. Some of the words used were also strange. But this didn't stop him from understanding the other party. He raised his head in shock. The hand on his head was still pressing down, so he could only raise it slightly. He tried his best to look up and meet the other party's eyes. The man, whose head was pressed down, trembled as he spoke. Who are you? And who is Sulu? Gong Xie thought that the man didn't understand and spoke slower this time. What Gong Xie didn't know was that the man on the ground couldn't believe what he was seeing. It wasn't that he didn't understand. Wasn't this another type of puppet that Yinjiao had imitated the Rock Hill City people to control? Wasn't this a corpse? No, that couldn't be right. A controlled corpse puppet couldn't speak. Then what was this thing in front of him? Or, was this a helper that Yinjiao had found? Gong Xie saw that the man didn't speak. He pressed down harder on the man's head. Feeling the pain on his head, the man finally snapped out of his shock. Now wasn't the time to dwell on these questions. I'll talk. Don't hit me. I'll tell you everything. Feeling the fingers on his head stop, the man's Adam's apple bobbed. He swallowed a mouthful of blood and tried his best to calm down so that he could analyze the situation and find a scapegoat. It was Sulu who found me. He said that he lost something important and that Yinjiao stole it. He asked me to help him find it. It's true. He even gave me a bug box to look for it. As he spoke, the man took out the bug box. Although the bug box was made of wood, it was very resilient. When the man was beaten up, The bug box was also affected. However, there were only some dents on the bug box. The inside of the box didn't change much. Gon Xie looked inside the opened bug box. The wriggling worm was wriggling in his direction. It was using its head to knock against the wall of the box. The man obviously noticed it as well. His expression changed as he turned the wooden box in his hand, turning the worm against the wall of the box to face him. However, when he stopped, the worm started moving again. It crawled along the wooden box and the wall of the box. Then, it stopped in front of Gon Xie and used its head to knock against the wall of the box. The man's hand that was holding the wooden box began to tremble. The worm's reaction was enough to prove the identity of the man in front of him. This was the lost thing that Su Lu had mentioned. This was the goal of his trip. After realizing this, the man's heart was filled with regret. Su Lu, you fucking lied to me. Didn't you say that the Yanjiao stole something similar to those puppets in the desert? Didn't you say that the lost thing was an ancient corpse that couldn't be more dead? Then, who was the person who had beaten him half to death and almost crushed his head into pieces? How was this person similar to those puppets in the desert that resembled dried corpses? Oh, this weirdo could still talk. Other than the fact that he didn't have a heartbeat, didn't bleed, and didn't pant, which part of him resembled an ancient corpse that had been dead for a long time? Or did he come to life? I don't fucking believe it. Chapter 760. I've been tricked. That was what the intruder was thinking. He hated Su Lu for it. If Su Lu had told him the truth, he definitely wouldn't have accepted this mission. Although he desperately needed merits to raise his ranking, he wouldn't risk his life. As for Gon Xie, when the intruder mentioned Su Li's name, his murderous aura intensified. Before this, Xiao Xian had told him that if he wanted to know if Rock Hill City really existed in the desert and if they really used the Han tribesmen as puppets, all he had to do was wait a few days. Xiao Xian knew that Su Lu wouldn't give up so easily. If they really valued the Han tribesmen like Gon Xie, they would definitely think of a way to snatch him back. Xiao Xian didn't know if the Han tribesmen had the same physique as Gon Xie, but with Gon Xie's physique, if he was turned into a puppet, he would definitely be a powerful force. Su Lu would definitely think of a way to get someone to steal something so important back. If no one came after a few days, it would mean that Su Lu didn't value Gon Xie that much. Xiao Xian would also let Gon Xie go to the desert. However, reality proved that Su Lu did value Gon Xie a lot. Why did Su Lu send you here? Gon Xie asked again. He wanted to know why Su Lu valued him so much. For the sake of survival, the intruder didn't want to waste too much time talking. He directly told them everything he knew about Su Lu to attract their hatred. Fortunately, he had asked a lot of questions before accepting this mission. Su Lu said that the stolen item was very important. It was given to him by an important person in Rock Hill City. After some time, he would have to hand it over to someone else. He had to find it on time, or else he would be punished. Because the intruder spoke very loudly, even though the secret room was soundproof, Xiao Xian and Jing Luo could still hear him. Moreover, Xiao Xian had already opened the door slightly, so they could hear him even more clearly. Xiao Xian thought of the person from the Yi family. The construction of Rock Hill City in the desert was due to the ominous contribution of the Yi family. Some people even suspected that the construction of Rock Hill City in that location and the avoidance of the disaster was due to Yi Xiang of the Yi family. It was rumored that Yi Si had a hand in the incident with the desert monsters. Even Yi Xiang thought so. Yi Xiang might have been the one who found the Han tribesmen. The tombs the tribesmen left for themselves were not easy to find, and those who could find them were not ordinary people. Do they have more people like me? Gon Xie asked. This was what he wanted to know the most. Yes, there is. The eyes of the person whose head was pressed to the ground moved. He felt that he was so smart to be able to hear the urgency in this strange person's words. Immediately, he thought quickly and made a decision. He continued, There is, but I heard from them that other than you, the others have already been made into puppets. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Don't kill me, I still have a lot to say. When he heard the first sentence, Gon Xie was happy. However, when he heard the second sentence, he was furious. He almost lost control of his strength. Are you telling the truth? Gonqie asked. The intruder vaguely understood the key words and quickly nodded. Yes, I'm telling the truth. I swear. It's because everyone else has been made into puppets and you're the only one left. This is a hurdle for the others. As you all know, there's more than one person in Rock Hill City who can control puppets. If any of them can turn you into a puppet and cross that hurdle, they'll be promoted. As for the person besides Sulu, if he can't turn you into a puppet within the stipulated time, he'll have to give you to the next person. In other words, other than Gonqie, everyone else in the Han tribe had been turned into puppets. The reason they kept Gonqie alive was to give the other controllers a test. Whoever could solve this question would be promoted. Gonqie was just a test subject. Everyone who took the test had a limited amount of time to solve the question. If they couldn't solve the question within the time limit, they'd have to give it to the next candidate. No wonder Sulu and the person beside him were so anxious. Not only did they fail to solve the question, they even lost it. If others knew about this, especially the higher-ups, how could they survive in the desert? How could Sulu, who had always been ambitious to become the next lord of Luoya City, compete with the third young master, Sugu? Xiao Xian sensed that Gonqie's aura was unstable. He vaguely looked like he was when he was agitated. He was worried that Gonqie would crush the intruder to death. He knocked on the stone door and opened it wider. Gonqie and the intruder looked at the stone door. Xiao Xian looked at the person who was caught and asked, "Is this your robber account?" Stolen numbers were the numbers within the word thief. This was what Xiao Xian learned from the people who used to be thieves. Robber 11. The intruder saw that the Yanjiao had finally revealed himself. Xiao Xian shook his head. "You're not. I've seen Robber 11 before. The one you saw was the previous Robber 11. I'm the current Robber 11. The intruder quickly said. "Your ranking changed again?" Xiao Xian asked, "Is the previous Robber 7 dead?" The current Robber 11 was shocked. The Yanjiao had an old grudge against the robbers. He had already cursed Robber 7 countless times in his mind. If you're talking about the Robber 7 from a few years ago, he's still Robber 7 now. It said that one time when he failed a mission, Robber 6, who was with him, blew the whistle and was rescued by others. Robber 6 and Robber 7 were useless. You might not know this, but we have a rule, especially the top 10. If they failed a mission and blew the whistle for help, their ranking will drop by 1 place. Robber 6 and Robber 7 were demoted because of that failure. However, because someone before them died, their overall ranking rose by 1 place. They're really lucky. Robber 11 didn't finish his sentence. Other than Robber 2, who was in front of Robber 6, Robber 9 was also killed on the other side of the sea. With 2 deaths, those who were once in the 11th and 12th place were now in the top 10. As for Robber 11, he was once in the 13th place and was now Robber 11. He was only 1 step away from the top 10. He didn't dare to cross the sea to the other side of the continent. He didn't want to be killed like Robber 9. Therefore, he was waiting for someone to die before him. He just needed to maintain his achievements. Now that Sulu came looking for him, Robber 11 was tempted. It wasn't just because of the benefits Sulu promised. The Yanjiao tribe was in the limelight. If he could steal something from the Yanjiao tribe, his achievements would be even greater. He might even be able to squeeze the people in front of him down the list. The Yanjiao tribe was strong, but there were only so many of them. After he found out the location of his target with the help of the worm, he observed the surroundings of the Flaming River Castle for a few days. There weren't many guards inside, and there were also many people from other tribes. He liked places where people were mixed because it was convenient for him to hide. However, Robber 11 didn't expect the Yanjiao to set up a trap for him. Robber 6 and Robber 7? Blow the whistle? Xiao Xian recalled the situation in the forest when they were looking for the green-faced fanged beast. Robber 6 was the one helping Robber 7. They blew the whistle and were rescued. Robber 11 was still talking, obviously insulting Robber 6 and 7 and cursing Sulu. Xiao Xian suddenly asked, "Do you know why Robber 6 and 7 were demoted?" Robber 11, who was in the midst of mocking Xiao Xian, was stunned. He looked at Xiao Xian in confusion. At the same time, he had a bad feeling. Back then, robbers 6 and 7 wanted to steal something from Yanjiao. They were chased by me, so they had no choice but to blow the whistle. Otherwise, they would have been smashed to death. Xiao Xian closed the stone door again. Robbers were more hated than Changles. Not only did they take pride in stealing, they would do anything to get it. Back then, some of the people from other tribes who entered the forest with Xiao Xian were killed by robbers. Tonight, if it weren't for Xiao Xian's arrangements, some Yanjiao people would have been killed as well. For example, the 2 Yanjiao people who were guarding the entrance of the secret passage. Robber 11, who was locked inside, was stunned by Xiao Xian's words. He wasn't one of the top 10 robbers. He didn't have many resources and he wasn't well informed. It wasn't easy for him to find out the movements of the top 10 robbers. Of course, he didn't know why robbers 6 and 7 were demoted. If he knew that robbers 6 and 7 were killed by Yanjiao people, he wouldn't have come here even if he was beaten to death. Su Lu, you fucking set me up. Robber 11 thought. If he could get out of here alive, he would definitely kill Su Lu and everyone around him. Unfortunately, Gong Xie didn't plan on letting him go. Gong Xie already knew from Xiao Xian that the puppets in the desert were lifeless creatures with no self-consciousness. The remaining people in his tribe were all turned into puppets. In other words, he was the only one who was truly alive. But in reality, Gong Xie himself couldn't continue the Han tribe. He couldn't be considered a normal person anymore. If Xiao Xian didn't bring him here, he could imagine what would have happened to him. No matter what Xiao Xian's original intentions were, Xiao Xian did bring him back to life. He hated the Rain tribe, but in comparison, he hated the people in Rock Hill City who turned his people into puppets. They were his enemies. In his grief and anger, this Robber 11 who wanted to bring him back to Rock Hill City and hand him over to his enemies became even more despicable. This time, Xiao Xian didn't come in to interrupt. Gong Xie's rising anger made the energy in his body restless. His red eyes glowed fiercely as if his blood was boiling. It was as if he was about to break through the barrier in front of him. An aura of grief and indignation seeped out of his body and surged forward. A long howl suddenly sounded. The air in the secret room churned as if a hurricane had been set off. Robber 11, who was pressed in front of Gong Xie, felt it the most intensely. His entire body trembled from the wind and he was shocked. This wasn't a sound that could be made by a normal person's throat and lungs. The sound was formed by the airflow coming out of his nostrils and the roar coming from his mouth. It was like the roar of a nocturnal beast in the forest. The entire secret room was shaking. Not just the secret room, but the entire flaming river castle was shaking. After a pause, a second long howl followed. An even fiercer aura erupted from Gong Xie's body. With Gong Xie as the epicenter, it surged outwards. This second howl was louder than the first. The rising energy turned into a roar. The dust on the floor, ceiling, and everywhere else was pulled out by this howl. It flew up and down along with the turbulent airflow. The howl came from the flaming river castle. However, because of some narrow vents and the echoes within the castle, the howl had an inexplicable sense of strangeness. It sent chills down the spines of those who heard it in the night. Many people woke up from their dreams. Many travelers were already on high alert. The sound made them sit up straight from their animal hide cushions. They took out their weapons and looked outside. There was nothing outside except for those who were frightened and went out to see what was going on. What's going on? Are there fearsome beasts? I didn't hear the Yanjiao's warning. The last time a fearsome beast came, they blew the whistle. Maybe the Yanjiao people forgot to blow the whistle? Or maybe they didn't want to blow the whistle. The conspiracy theorist's mind started to wander as he thought of all the possibilities. The birds in the nearby forest screamed and flew away, not caring about their confused sense of direction in the night. This made people feel even more uneasy. The howl sounded 3 times, each time more terrifying than the last. Some people guessed that the Yanjiao must have secretly raised a fearsome beast to guard the flaming river castle. It was just that no one knew about it. No one knew why it was exposed this time. Maybe it was to guard against people who wanted to sneak into the flaming river castle. The howl made some people give up on the idea of entering the castle, but it also made some people restless, like the Chonglis. Not long ago, they left the flaming river castle and went out to play. They saw the customs of different tribes and even watched some tribes merge their fire seeds. However, to them, those tribes were too poor, so they didn't want to help. In the end, they decided to go back to the flaming river trading point. This time, they came back for a few days. They couldn't stay idle and wanted to leave again, but they didn't expect to encounter something like this. "I really want to go in and take a look," Wu He said. "Aren't you afraid of being caught by the Yanjiao again?" Someone beside Wu He disagreed. The experience last time was too deep. He didn't want to go through it again. Among them, some agreed, some disagreed. In the end, Wu He went to EC in the middle of the night to ask him. He had been taken advantage of before, so this time, he wanted to listen to EC's opinion. EC was startled awake by the 3 strange howls at the flaming river castle. Now that it was quiet, he was woken up by Wu He again. He was still yawning. When he heard Wu He's words, EC stopped yawning and said, "If you want to die, go ahead. Don't tell me you know me. Don't drag me down." When he heard EC's words, Wu He became anxious. "What? Are you saying that it's very dangerous inside and we won't be able to come back?" "With your strength, you definitely won't be able to come back," EC said confidently. Seeing that Wu He didn't believe him, EC pointed at the grasshopper who was still hiding in the corner with a vigilant look. The spikes on its back were still there. "Do you see that? You're so scared? Then what's inside the flaming river castle? Is it a human or a beast?" Wu He was still curious. The Chonglu people were naturally curious. It was their nature to be curious. "I don't care. I only know that I'll die a horrible death if I go in. If you want to go, then go." EC didn't want to waste any more time with them. He asked the grasshopper to chase them away. He looked in the direction of the flaming river castle and whispered, "These Yanjiao people are getting more and more confusing. What is it?" After the commotion at night died down, Zheng Luo called a few important guards over and scolded them harshly. Only then did the guards know that someone had sneaked into the flaming river castle. He didn't tell too many people before this, mainly because it was a better plan. He needed to keep it a secret. At the same time, Zheng Luo had another idea. He wanted to use this incident to teach the Yanjiao people a lesson. Now, many Yanjiao people were more like nouveau riche than real masters who had lived for thousands of years. Even if Yanjiao's ancestors were arrogant, they weren't like this. Their mentality wasn't right. However, the mentality of the Yanjiao people wasn't something that could be adjusted in just a few years. The alarm bells couldn't stop ringing. Once they stopped ringing, they would relax. In the secret underground room, there were all kinds of poisonous gas and hidden weapons everywhere. Robber 11 had tried everything he could before he died. Unfortunately, he still couldn't escape from Ganxie. The next day, when Xiao Xian went in, Ganxie was standing there in a daze. There was blood on his hands and his eyes were unfocused. He looked like he was frozen. Xiao Xian wasn't surprised. It wasn't the first time he was like this. He looked at Robber 11's body on the ground. It was still intact. Last night, Ganxie's emotions were turbulent. However, it wasn't as intense as Xiao Xian expected. It was strange. If someone knew what Xiao Xian was thinking, they would definitely refute him. Last night, this person was roaring like a wild beast. The entire flaming river castle shook. His roar could be heard outside the castle. Everyone in the trading point was shocked awake. How was that not intense? However, when you thought about what happened to Ganxie, it wasn't intense. This was why Xiao Xian didn't stop him last night. Ganxie's emotions were a little strange. In the secret room, the person standing there quietly looked very calm. It was as if the person who roared last night wasn't him. He was frighteningly calm. "It's strange," Ganxie said. "What's strange?" Xiao Xian asked. "You don't feel too sad or angry?" Ganxie's words weren't very clear. Luckily, he said the important words clearly. Xiao Xian also understood. Ganxie realized that his emotions weren't that intense. There were emotions of sadness and hatred, but they weren't that intense. This wasn't normal. His roar was very fierce, but it was different from the hysteria caused by intense emotions. Moreover, he calmed down too quickly. Xiao Xian thought that Gan Xie was cold-hearted, but he didn't expect that to be the case. Xiao Xian didn't answer him. He knew that Gan Xie wasn't stupid. After he woke up, Gan Xie's thinking had gradually returned to normal. Back then, the shaman of the Han tribe had chosen someone in a desperate situation, so he probably wasn't stupid either. Other than strength, intelligence was also part of the shaman's consideration. Most shamans had the same mentality. They only chose the right and most suitable person. As for Gan Xie's current situation, he probably already knew the answer. Xiao Xian didn't need to say more. "You didn't sleep last night?" Xiao Xian asked. This person stood with his eyes open the whole night. Shouldn't he sleep standing up? Was he really a zombie? Sleep? "No, I don't need to sleep anymore," Gan Xie said slowly. After a pause, he said, "I've slept enough." Actually, it wasn't that he had slept enough. Gan Xie really didn't need to sleep like a normal person. Sleep was a periodic adjustment of the body, but Gan Xie didn't need it. His body was no longer a normal body. He didn't need this kind of adjustment. For example, when he forced Robber 11 to slow down, he didn't feel tired. He didn't feel tired because he wasn't exhausted. "What do you plan to do now? Go to the desert?" Xiao Xian asked. "No," Gan Xie said, "now is not the time." From Robber 11's words yesterday, Gan Xie knew that he couldn't fight against Rock Hill City on his own. The fact that they could turn his tribesmen into puppets showed that they were very powerful. If it was a normal Han tribesman, he might have rushed to the desert on impulse. However, Gan Xie calmly analyzed the pros and cons and made the most suitable choice for himself. There was another reason. He didn't understand the current world. After so many years, everything seemed to have changed. He needed time to get used to it. No one remembered that there was a tribe called Han. If he didn't wake up, even his totem would have disappeared. "I want to stay here," Gan Xie said. "Okay." Xiao Xian didn't mention too many conditions. With Gan Xie's intelligence, he should know what to do if he wanted to stay here. "Where do you want to stay?" Xiao Xian asked. "Here." Gan Xie looked around the secret room. His gaze stopped at the broken wooden box. He pointed at it and asked Xiao Xian, "Do you still have that?" "Sure, I'll get someone to make another one." "Dry wood. Using sun-dried wood?" "Sure, we have dry wood for our ships. It's sturdy enough." "I want to take a look outside." Gan Xie tried his best to express his thoughts with the few words he had. Xiao Xian looked at the hidden weapons on Gan Xie's body. "Don't you need to remove them first?" He just wanted to look outside. "Okay, I'll bring you out." Xiao Xian led Gan Xie out of the secret room and up the underground passage. Although the people in the Flaming River Castle had already been informed of the existence of this strange person, they were still shocked when they first saw him. Putting aside the fact that he had green skin, there were sharp blades all over his body, and some parts of his skin were flipped open. There were also obvious cuts so deep that the bones could be seen. If he was an ordinary person, he would have died long ago. However, this person didn't even bleed. It was as if all the wounds and sharp weapons on his body didn't exist. He followed Xiao Xian with a stiff face. Xiao Xian didn't bring him out. Instead, he brought him to the Flaming River Tower. "If we go up, we'll reach the top of the Flaming River Tower. However, I think it's fine here," Xiao Xian said. Gan Xie stood here and could see the entire trading point. He could also see the mountains and forests in the distance. Everything had changed. The houses, the people's clothes, everything was different from what he had seen in the depths of his memory. It was like a new world. Time seemed to have passed for a long time. The sun was high in the sky, shining through the window. Gan Xie reached out his hand and touched the place where Yang Guang's light shone. After a while, he retracted his hand. It was a little hot, much hotter than his body temperature. It felt like he was being burned. "As expected, he doesn't like it," Gan Xie muttered. How could a tribe with a sun in their totem not like the sun? It was just that everything had changed. His preferences had changed too. Chapter 761. Gan Xie temporarily settled down in the Flaming River Castle. Xiao Xian's underground secret room was his room, and Xiao Xian had another secret room prepared for him. Perhaps it was because his body had changed, but Gan Xie no longer ate beast meat. Instead, he drank blood directly. Every day, the slaughterhouse would send him some blood collected from the beasts they killed. Perhaps to some people, it was a pity that they couldn't eat delicious food, but to Gan Xie, it was simple as long as he could live. Gan Xie didn't like the sun. He preferred the dark underground secret room. When he was lying down, he would lie in a coffin-like wooden box made of dry wood. He didn't need to sleep, and would only lie down when he was deep in thought. When Gan Xie came out at night, he would listen to the Yinjiao guards talk about the mainland. This was agreed upon by Xiao Xian and Jing Luo. Gan Xie's ability to express himself was limited. He was also an antique, and he didn't even know what pottery was. Perhaps it was because he had been buried underground for so long that he couldn't speak fluently. He even had a strange accent. Perhaps Gan Xie would be able to change if he listened to other people's words. On the other hand, the Yinjiao people didn't completely trust Gan Xie. After all, they weren't from the same tribe. Gan Xie was too dangerous, especially at night when most people weren't in a good state of mind. It was better to have a person like this in front of them than not to see him at all. At first, the guards were nervous when they saw Gan Xie. They had heard the screams that night, but they didn't expect it to be made by a human. Gradually, they got used to it. Gan Xie was actually quite easy to get along with. He didn't talk much, and even if he did, he would only say a few words. If the Yinjiao needed help, he would help the guards. He even helped catch a few people who wanted to sneak into the flaming river castle at night. His senses were stronger than the guards. As for the Rain tribe, Xiao Xian had already told Gan Xie about it. As former enemies, Gan Xie didn't have a good impression of the Rain tribe. However, when he heard about the Rain tribe's current situation, he suddenly remembered the Han shaman's regretful look. Perhaps they shouldn't have fought so hard back then? Both sides had suffered great losses, resulting in the current situation. However, with the players from Rock Hill City drawing aggro, Gan Xie placed most of his aggro on Desert City. Plus, Gan Xie's hatred towards the Rain tribe wasn't that strong. Since the Rain tribe had a good relationship with Yinjiao, and he was relying on Yinjiao, he wouldn't touch the Rain tribe for the time being. On the other hand, what shocked Gan Xie the most was what Xiao Xian had mentioned about the situation on the mainland. After the fusion of the fire seed, the tribe might disappear? Could disbanded tribesmen form new groups? Gan Xie couldn't believe it. This overturned everything he knew. As a tribesman whose thoughts were stuck in the past, Gan Xie was very curious about this. He didn't understand what it was like to leave their tribe and form a new group with outsiders. What kind of feelings did they have? It was rare for something to distract Gan Xie. Xiao Xian thought for a moment and said, "If you're interested in the other side of the sea, you can ask someone." Gan Xie was puzzled. He really wanted to know more now. The world today was too new. There were all kinds of handmade products, from pottery to metal, and the changes in the tribe's fire seed. All of these changed his perception of the world. He had already learned a lot from the Yinjiao people on duty at night. It turned out that there was another piece of land on the other side of the sea. The two pieces of land were close to each other because of the natural disaster, and there were people coming and going from both sides. There are people from the other side of the sea in the flaming river castle too. I'll take you there. Xiao Xian looked at the sun outside. It was morning now, and Yang Guang was fine today. Gan Xie didn't like to move around during the day, but the people there were asleep at night. Gan Xie didn't like to walk under the sun anymore, but he could endure it if he wanted to know more. Putting on a hooded cloak, Gan Xie followed Xiao Xian out of the flaming river castle. Wearing a hood in the middle of the day and covering his entire body was indeed strange in the trading point. However, it wasn't like they hadn't seen stranger things before. The reason why they looked over there curiously was because the people in the trading point knew Xiao Xian. A person brought by Xiao Xian and dressed so mysteriously, so everyone was wondering who that person was. Isi was busy with the things at hand. He had 2 accounts books in his hands, both of which belonged to the Yinjiao people. One was a tally of the things that travelers paid when they entered the Flaming River trading point in the past 30 days. The other was a tally of the rent. Some of the smaller tribes nearby had already set up shop here and would pay rent every 30 days. Beside EC, the half-beast slave, Grasshopper, was dozing off on a low stone bench. Suddenly, Grasshopper woke up with a start. The thorns on his back stood up and he looked around nervously. Then he looked in a certain direction. Sensing Grasshopper's change, EC stopped what he was doing and frowned. He was wondering what had happened. Not long after, EC saw Xiao Xian bring in a person wearing a sackcloth cloak. "Are you busy?" Xiao Xian asked. "Not really, it's just some small things." EC looked at the cloaked person beside Xiao Xian. He was even more curious because Grasshopper was on full alert. If EC wasn't here, Grasshopper would have run away. This was his reaction to danger. "This is?" EC asked. Gan Xie pulled back his hood, revealing his expressionless face. His red eyes looked at EC. Gan Xie from the Han tribe. Han tribe? EC had never heard of it before. After coming here, he had studied a lot about the tribes. He remembered all the small and remote tribes that were mentioned, but he had never heard of this Han tribe. Furthermore, this person was able to make Grasshopper react like this, so he was obviously very strong. His tribe shouldn't be too weak either. No one had even mentioned the Han tribe before. Gan Xie left the tribe for a long time. He wanted to know more about the other side of the sea, so I brought him here. "You're more familiar with the situation there," Xiao Xian said. Although Zheng Luo and the others also came from the other side of the sea, they lived far away from the city and lived in the forest. There were many things that they didn't know. Asking EC would be more comprehensive. EC didn't find this troublesome. He was also curious about this person called Gan Xie. This person gave him a strange feeling. He didn't even feel his breathing from the moment he entered the room. If Gan Xie stood there without moving, he would really look like a stone statue. EC was about to agree when he heard some movement from the window. "EC, I still can't accept this. Tell me about the Flaming River Castle." Wu He, who was climbing through the window, saw the situation in the room and his face turned pale. His whole body seemed to be embedded in the window. He froze there and didn't dare to go any closer. "Sorry, wrong door." As he spoke, Wu He turned to jump out of the window. However, Xiao Xian grabbed him by the back of his shirt and dragged him back in like a chick. As for the other Chang Lis behind Wu He, they immediately fled upon seeing Xiao Xian, ignoring Wu He. It wasn't that they didn't care about Wu He's life. They had to protect themselves first and then wait for an opportunity to save him. If it were any other Yanjiao who caught Wu He, they wouldn't be so scared. They might have rushed over to save him on the spot. However, it was Xiao Xian who dragged Wu He in. They still remembered that he was the one who slapped them down from the sky. They were instantly scared. "I didn't steal anything this time," Wu He quickly explained. He knew he couldn't escape from Xiao Xian's grip, so he stopped struggling and tried to sound sincere. "I really didn't steal anything. I didn't ask you that. Why are you so guilty?" Xiao Xian dragged Wu He into the room. "I'm not guilty. Definitely not." Wu He said. "Then what did you mean just now? Did you want to sneak into the Flaming River Castle at night?" Xiao Xian asked. "Definitely not." "Really?" Wu He denied. Although he did have this intention, he still couldn't hold back his curiosity. He discussed it with his companions and decided to ask EC for his opinion. Who knew that he would be caught by Xiao Xian the moment he arrived? He wouldn't admit it even if he was beaten to death. Although Xiao Xian's tone was calm, he was still worried that Xiao Xian would turn hostile the next moment and kill him right here and now. After hearing Wu He's words, Xiao Xian only chuckled, "Ha!" Wu He became even more nervous under Xiao Xian's stare. He didn't know what Xiao Xian was trying to do. Was he going to lock him up in the cave again? "You guys seem to have a lot of free time recently," Xiao Xian said slowly. "No, we're planning to leave today." Wu He was about to promise that they would leave the Flaming River trading point as soon as possible when Xiao Xian said, "I'm afraid you guys won't be able to leave." Wu He's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean?" Xiao Xian slapped Wu He's shoulder. "I have a mission for you." After being slapped by Xiao Xian, Wu He's legs turned to jelly and he almost knelt down. He was really afraid that Xiao Xian would kill him. After hearing Xiao Xian's words, he became alert again. "What?" Xiao Xian pointed at Gan Xie. Answer his question. Wu turned to look at Gan Xie, who was as invisible as a rock man. He was too focused on guarding against Xiao Xian just now and only noticed this person now. Who is this bald guy? He didn't look like someone easy to talk to. It was better to stay away from people like him. Wu He immediately categorized Gan Xie as someone he should stay away from. The Changlis were very observant in this aspect. However, looking at Xiao Xian, if he didn't agree to this mission, he might not be able to leave this place alive. All right, brother, what do you want to ask? Gan Xie retreated to a spot 3 steps away from Gan Xie and Xiao Xian and asked carefully. It's about the other side of the sea. For example, the origins of some of the gangs. You can talk about the Changlis too, Xiao Xian said. Not the Changlis. Can you talk about other people? Sure. Gan Xie will ask if you have any questions. Are you going to let me go after that? Sure. Ah, that's easy. Come, let me explain. Wu He waved at Gan Xie. He didn't even need to prepare before he started to blabber on and on about some of his old enemies as examples. However, Gan Xie didn't care. He just wanted to know how those gangs were formed and how those people felt. He's indeed more suitable to talk about this. EC smiled, but there was no mirth in his eyes. He turned to Xiao Xian and asked, "Did you bring him back from the desert?" EC had always wanted to know more about the desert. Unfortunately, he didn't have a way to get information. Xiao Xian was also about to ask about Yi Xiang from the Yi family when a whistle sounded. It wasn't a sharp warning whistle. It was a reminder. Someone was coming to the Yinjiao tribe. Let's talk about this next time. I'll go take a look. Xiao Xian turned to Gan Xie and said, "You stay here." Gan Xie nodded. After Xiao Xian left, Wu He couldn't stay any longer. He wanted to go out and see what was going on. Since Xiao Xian wasn't here, the biggest threat was gone. He was emboldened again. Unfortunately, just as Wu He was about to leave, Gan Xie grabbed his arm. "Be gentle. Let's talk nicely. Don't hit me." Wu He retracted his foot. He was about to scold Gan Xie when he saw Gan Xie's bloodshot eyes. Suddenly, he felt a gust of cold wind behind him. On the other side, Xiao Xian arrived at the Flaming River Castle. Zheng Luo and Duo Kong were standing on top of the Flaming River Tower, looking into the distance with their binoculars. "What happened?" Xiao Xian asked. "I can't see clearly, but it looks like someone is coming," Zheng Luo said as he looked into the sky. A white figure was flying towards them at lightning speed. It was Gigu's white falcon. The bird was holding a piece of cloth in its claws. There were words on the cloth. Xiao Xian opened it and said to Zheng Luo, "I'll go back to the headquarters first. Keep an eye on Gan Xie." "Go on." Zheng Luo also saw the words on the cloth. People from the D Mountain tribe were here. Chapter 762. Near the drumming tribe, crocodiles were sunbathing on the shore. Sensing something, the crocodiles that were floating on the surface of the water either dove back down or came ashore. Then, they stared at the surface of the river with emotionless eyes. The Flaming River was the widest river on the mainland. At this moment, there were a few long bamboo rafts on the surface of the river. Strangely, there were only 2 people standing on the rafts. The rest of the rafts were filled with large shells of different shapes. Regardless of their appearance, the beautiful patterns on the shells were something no one had ever seen in the Flaming River region. Even the drumming tribesmen, who often went into the water, had never seen such shells before. "Who are those people?" A drumming woman who was washing clothes by the river asked the person beside her. "I don't know. Are they from downstream? Their target is the Yinjiao tribe." Another person patted the agitated crocodile and looked at the river cautiously. "Those people are not normal. There are still people in the river." The drumming tribesmen who were good swimmers could see that there were still many people in the river, but they were all surrounding the rafts. The rafts were close to the other side of the river, so they couldn't see them clearly. Soon, they saw the Yinjiao people guarding the river walk over. At that moment, several figures shot out of the water, leaving trails of white water behind them. "Ancestor!" someone exclaimed. "What was that just now?" "Was that the fish?" No, it was a human." The drumming tribesmen who saw the situation on the other side of the river took a deep breath. They couldn't care less about comforting the agitated crocodiles anymore. They rubbed their eyes and turned to look at the others. Did I see wrongly just now? Why did I feel like it was a fish that came out of the water? But when I looked again, all I saw was a human standing on the shore. Me too, I saw that too. The figures that jumped out of the water did look like fish. They couldn't see clearly what it was, but they could see the shape of a fish's tail. However, when those figures came ashore, they saw a human standing there. This made them very confused. At the same time, on the other side of the river, the Yanjiao tribesmen were shocked when they saw the D tribesmen come ashore. However, they had seen a D child with a human head and a fish body before, so they quickly calmed down. This time, the little girl Dian Dian was not among the people who came, but the person leading the team was still He Bian. Other than him, there were a few familiar faces, but the rest were unfamiliar faces. By the time Xiao Xian arrived, the D mountain tribesmen had already been invited up the mountain. The large shells they brought were all moved into the house. Seeing Xiao Xian, He Bian, who was talking to Gigu, quickly stood up with a grateful smile on his face. Elder Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian looked at He Bian and the other D mountain tribesmen in surprise. Their auras were different from the last time he saw them. They seemed stronger and stronger. Last time, when He Bian brought the seriously ill Dian Dian here, He Bian and the others were sick as well. It was just that their illness wasn't obvious. Now they were all cured. The reason they fell sick was because their fire seed had been swallowed. Now that they were all cured, it meant that their battle to protect their fire seed was a success. Congratulations, Xiao Xian said. I still have to thank you, head elder. He Bian said seriously. As he spoke, he also asked the other D mountain tribesmen to thank Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian looked around and asked, "Where's Dian Dian?" "She's already a shaman of the D mountain tribe. Our tribe just finished a bloody battle, and there are many things that need to be done. She has to stay in the tribe." He Bian told Xiao Xian everything that had happened after they returned to the D mountain tribe. Gigu pursed his lips. When He Bian was talking to him just now, he didn't even tell him so much. He was even a little perfunctory. Now, he was telling Xiao Xian everything. He even told Xiao Xian about the changes in the D mountain tribe's fire seed. What happened to it's inconvenient to talk about the fire seed? Did he take that as a fart? However, Gigu knew what the D mountain tribesmen were thinking. They valued shamans more. In their eyes, Xiao Xian was the same as their shaman. As for chiefs and leaders, they were all secondary. After all, the shaman was in charge of the D mountain tribe. In addition, Xiao Xian had helped them a lot. Instead of saying that the D mountain tribe was giving gifts to the Yanjiao tribe to express their gratitude, it was more like they were giving these gifts to Xiao Xian. However, the changes in the D mountain tribe were truly shocking. After they received advice from Xiao Xian on how to merge with the fire seed, they went back and swallowed the D fish's portion of the fire seed instead. Of course, things were much more complicated and cruel. They even had to change the deeply ingrained mindset of the D mountain tribesmen. It wasn't an easy task. During a battle of life and death, people might be affected by the atmosphere. Their emotions would be stimulated, and they would charge forward. When the battle was over, some people would overthink things. No wonder He Bian said that Dian Dian was very busy. The shaman needed to stay in the tribe to calm the people down. He also needed to make arrangements after the battle. Xiao Xian listened to He Bian talk about the battle between the D mountain tribe and the D fish as he observed the D mountain tribesmen around him. When He Bian mentioned Dian Dian, these people's expressions turned respectful. They had heard that the previous shaman of the D tribe couldn't survive the war. It was only after Dian Dian took over that they managed to solve the fire seeds problem. Are all of you in the same situation as Dian Dian? Can you transform into a fish? Xiao Xian asked. This is actually the same as awakening your totemic power. If you can awaken your totemic power, you can transform into a fish. These two are tied together, He Bian explained. Xiao Xian understood what He Bian meant. The D mountain tribe's fire seed had swallowed the D fish's fire seed. Now that the two had merged into one, When they used their totemic power, they triggered another type of power in the fire seed. How was the merging process? Xiao Xian asked again. Although it was very difficult, it was a success in the end. I thought it would take a long time and Dian Dian was prepared for a long battle. However, she didn't expect it to be resolved so quickly. He Bian glanced at Xiao Xian when he said this. Back when Dian Dian was in Yanjiao, her transformation only lasted for one night. The devouring of the fire seed was similar to the transformation in Dian Dian's body. After the fire seed was resolved, Dian Dian said that the reason she was able to let the fire seed devour so quickly was probably because of Xiao Xian. When he thought about this, He Bian looked at Xiao Xian with even more respect. Actually, different people have different degrees of fish transformation. The stronger they are, the greater the degree of fish transformation. He Bian transformed as he spoke. The patterns on his body looked like they were covered in fish scales. His arms swelled and his upper arms became more obvious. His fingers had long, sharp nails and webbed nails. As for his lower body, his legs, which were originally standing on the ground, had turned into a fish tail. His entire body looked thicker and longer. This time, He Bian and the rest of the tribe were wearing different clothes from the last time. It was much simpler and they wore fishskin skirts. The material was different from the ones Xiao Xian saw last time. There were large patches of fish scales on the skirt, and some parts of the skirt even had dark brown scales. This time, most of the D mountain tribesmen were wearing this kind of fish skin. What is this fish skin? Xiao Xian asked. The D fish skin. It was obvious how much the D mountain tribesmen hated the D fish. However, the D fish skin was indeed more suitable for the D mountain tribesmen. It was more flexible and more suitable for swimming in water. He Bian told Xiao Xian about the gifts they brought this time. When they left last time, they promised that they would send gifts as soon as the matter was resolved. The D mountain tribesmen rarely used wooden boxes. They preferred to use natural materials. After some processing, they could turn them into suitable tools. For example, the big shells that were used as shipping boxes this time. There were 10 big shells. 3 of them contained pearls and other gemstones, 3 of them contained seashells, and 4 of them contained food. Salted fish? Xiao Xian looked at the dried fish in the shells. He picked one up and looked at it. These are not big fish. We usually eat them, so we brought the ones that we think are tasty. He Bian scratched his head. We wanted to bring some big sea beasts, but it's too far away. It's not easy to deliver them. If you come to the D mountain tribe, we'll catch as many as you eat. Xiao Xian didn't mind the size of these fish. Sea fish were good too. The people here mostly ate freshwater fish. Many of them had never eaten sea fish before. Oh right, there's one more thing. He Bian became serious. When we came here, we saw some strange people. We didn't understand what they were saying. They wanted to steal our things, so we killed them. He Bian took out a small golden plate. There were words engraved on it, but he didn't recognize the words. Xiao Xian took the plate. He Bian didn't recognize the words, but he did. They were words from the other side of the sea. Many people had already come to the Flaming River area. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.